understand the consequences or what patriarchy does to a society, and they will understand that GBV is really we are having a no tolerance on GBV as a country, and they will actually become activists against GBV, and that depends on the cultivation that the department is giving to our children, either through curriculum, either through campaigns, either through awareness programs. But we are hoping that we are able to get that rich account of how the department has tried to implement some of the resolutions of the Youth Parliament. It is important also, honorable members, that these resolutions are taken serious and they are taken into account by departments, because we as Parliament do not just convene these platforms or create these platforms and call all this youth formation and all these young people just to engage, and nothing happens. And they take resolutions and they inform and advise us on some of the policy gaps, on some of their experiences with the laws that we pass. And we don't do anything about the resolutions and their discussions. So we're hoping that the department really has taken serious those resolutions, and they have created mechanisms within the department to track if they are on course in terms of implementing some of those recommendations. And those that there are challenges with implementing, the department also engages with us on those challenges, and we're able to have a fruitful engagement on how we actualize the decisions and some of the recommendations of these young people who converged last year, hopeful and of course aiming to participate in building our country to be a better country. So with those words, honorable members, you are most welcome. Just as before I go to the other apologies, and you're welcome as well, the Department of Basic Education, the FFC delegation that is here, and other departments that might have joined us that we would have invited for this briefing meeting. You are all welcome to our meeting. Honorable members, I have an apology myself. I am in between meetings. You can hear the background is not necessarily that clear because I'm also attending another meeting. So I will be stepping out to join that meeting. And when I do, I am going to delegate Honorable Gadi to continue chairing the meeting. I might step out at around 10:30, where I am. The session or the meeting is starting at 10, but I do know that perhaps we might start, or I might join them at 10:30. When I do step out, I'm going to request Honorable Mgadi to continue chairing the meeting. I thought I should just also submit that apology, honorable members. But as and when I'm able to step out of the other meeting, I will rejoin and log into this meeting. With that, those words, honorable members, you're all welcome. Mr. Brown, can we then flight the agenda and deal with the attendance register and apologies?
Good morning, Chairperson, members of the Portfolio Committee and DBE, FHC and the National Planning Committee. Chair, from my side, I'll just quickly do the roll call for the Portfolio Committee. It's yourself. Then it's Honorable Thaban Chaba, Honorable Low, Honorable Magagula, Honorable Jordan, Honorable Spies, Honorable Mkize, Honorable Mgadi on the platform. I do note that Honorable Thaban Chaba has indicated that at around 11 she may have to step out of the meeting, but she will try and rejoin when she's able. Honorable Mgubeni has indicated that she's currently attending the Committee on Home Affairs. She'll try to join us a bit later as well. And then from the department chair, the Deputy Minister, Dr. Mahole, he has a long-standing commitment which she needs to attend to. And I do see the DG on the platform, but he has also indicated his apology because I do believe he's out of the country, but I think I've seen him on the platform. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Can you confirm with the other departments and the entities that have joined us? Please, can you confirm them?
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, we of course did invite both the National Planning Commission as well as the Financial and Fiscal Commission because they were also cited in the ATC referral. Chair, I would maybe allow, if allowed, that they will then indicate their presence. I do see them on the platform. I just don't have a comprehensive list with me as yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I would want us to do that, give them an opportunity to also introduce themselves. We'll start with the FFC.
Good morning, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members. I'm Thulani Ntuli, the Chief Executive Officer of Financial and Fiscal Commission. I'm accompanied here by the Head of Research, but I'm sure the acting chairperson will just join us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ntuli.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Madijan Ngaleni. I am the acting chair at the moment. So as CEO indicated, we are here, and also Mr. Chan, who is the head of research, and the teams are here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, acting chair. Is that the complete delegation of FFC so that we can move to the National Planning Commission?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm Commissioner Metcalf, and I'm joined by another five commissioners who I'll introduce. One is Commissioner Pillay, Commissioner Fiela, Commissioner Chifonyise, Commissioner Ramatsetsi, and Commissioner Mostert. From the Secretariat, we've got Ms. Makele and Mr. Malabatsi. I think that's everybody. If I've missed somebody out, perhaps you'll allow them to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Metcalf, and you are welcome with the other commissioners. Thank you very much for gracing us with the attendance, and we are looking forward to engaging with yourselves and the FFC, of course, on these resolutions and how you are working together and collaborating with DPE to ensure that we actualize some of these resolutions. Some of these resolutions, honorable members, are very key. They are very crucial for us in ensuring that our schooling environment become safe schooling environment that are conducive really for learning, free of GBV, free of bullying, and free of many other of the social ills that we are currently noticing. So we're really looking forward to engaging with yourselves, and you're welcome. Mr. Brown, can we go back to the agenda? Let's deal with the minutes. I know that we should be dealing with the minutes. Honorable members, I do hope that you've received the set of minutes and you were able to go through the minutes. Can we start with the amendments and corrections, if there are any proposals for the amendments and corrections? I'm noting hands. Okay, in the absence of corrections and amendments, I'm going to note hands for the adoption of the minutes. We did receive the minutes in time, honorable members. It is my understanding, or it is my belief, that members had adequate time to go through the minutes. So we're not going to go through the minutes word or sentence by sentence. Honorable Kabanchaba.
Good morning, Honorable Chair, all honorable members in the platform. I rise to adopt to move the adoption of the minute. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kabanchaba. Honorable Kabanchaba moves for the adoption of the minutes. Any seconders? Honorable Makakula.
Good morning, Chair, and everyone in the meeting. I do second Honorable Nchaba for the adoption of the minutes, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This set of minutes. So this is a set of minutes of the last meeting on Tuesday where we were engaging with the Western Cape PED. Those are the minutes that we've just adopted. Mr. Brown, it's my understanding that the minutes of the joint committee meeting of Friday are not yet, they're not ready yet. Mr. Brown?
That is correct, Chairperson. So we had the meeting on Friday. Those minutes will be made available to members, if not by close of business today, early tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so with that out of the way, honorable members, can we now start with the presentations, Mr. Brown? Can you flag the agenda so that I can see in terms of our program, which presentation are we set to receive first? Can we go up? Can you scroll up, Mr. Brown, please? The agenda for us, okay? Yes. Okay. So we should start with the DBE. And I know we've received, I've received, I think it's 3 presentations, the report itself, the DBE briefing. I am not sure, Mr. Brown, I just want to confirm if we are also going to receive the presentation from the NPC and the FFC, or if this the DBE presentation is incorporated, if it is a collective presentation. I just want to clarify that so that I know we're starting with the DBE and then where do we go from there?
Thank you, Chairperson. So we should be receiving 3 presentations this morning, one from DBE, one from the National Planning Commission, and then also one from the Financial and Fiscal Commission. I don't believe that the DBE presentation
Okay.
includes all of them.
Okay. 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 If that is the case, Mr. Brown, I would like us to start then, not with DBE. I want us to start with the FFC and then go to the NPC and then we finish with DBE. Honorable members, I prefer that we take all the presentations and then we engage with all the presentations afterwards. I hope that that approach is acceptable to members. Are we agreeing on that approach, members?
Yes, Chair. It's a very good one.
Okay.
We
Okay.
agree, Chair. We agree, Chair.
Okay. Okay. So I saw the presentations. They are not that long. So I would want to request that we afford each and every team 15 minutes for their presentation. Of course, we'll try to understand where the team is not done and perhaps just add a minute or 2. But we are essentially saying we're going to grant 15 minutes each for each team to present on, to make their presentation. So FFC CEO, Mr. Ntuli, Acting Chair, the floor is yours. You are starting.
Thank you very much, Chair. Without wasting any time, I would like Mr. Chang to take us through the presentation very briefly, that essential response to what we have been requested to do to assess this P20 youth program. Thank you, Chang. Can you take over? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, Honourable Chair and members. Without further ado, let me quickly share slides and then we can move forward here. First of all, I'd like to, as Commission, attend our deep appreciation for the invite and the referral to our recommendations, which is made annually on the division of revenue, mostly or specifically as per the Constitution, focused on the intergovernmental fiscal relations system and on the principles of equality and the rights of human rights and others, the constitutional principles, which I'll go into in further details. Agenda that we have prepared for you, Honorable Chair members, is that we will go quickly through the role of the FFC because yes, although we have been engaging one another in the portfolio committee four rooms and forums. However, I think given the context of the discussions and contents of this particular submission, which was the P20 Parliament's recommendations, it's worthwhile to again revisit some of that where the stakeholders and one another are positioned. And we have provided and conducted a brief analysis of the alignments with the current policies and plans in terms of the executive branch of government and the strategies thereof to see how particularly the recommendations of the P20 Youth Parliament are featured or aligned so that it translating or emanating in terms of the implementation arm of government, that is the executive branch. And we also dig deep into the assessment thereof in terms of some of the mechanisms in the system of governance from these recommendations. Because as FFC, we have in our years of analysis culminating to the fact with proof and evidence-based empirical data is that in South Africa, in general terms, we have great policies, very world-class legislation, and as well as the strategies and the plannings. What everything sort of starts to fall apart is when implementation. I hope honorable chair members would agree, together with the executive branch, is the implementation is the challenge where it lies. And also we will finally go through our findings and recommendations. As this submission, honorable chairman, is submitted, and also given that there's only 15 minutes that we have, that I'm not going to go through each and every slides, and including even that was already submitted for your reading, honorable chair members. But I'm rather just going to go straight to some of the key points. And that is when we looked at the P20 Youth Parliament recommendations. It's a whole host of them, 41 as far as we could identify in the report, recommendations spanning almost 7, 8, or 9 areas of themes. It's not possible, or shall we say, one of the potential challenge or weaknesses in this whole host of recommendations in trying to bring it into implementation is that the issue of relevance. Issue of how correlated or strongly related these recommendations are to the mandates of the portfolio committees, not just this committee, for example, that we would attended to the employment and economic development cluster last time when we made the briefing on the P20 recommendations. And so what happens then, ultimate, say, the outcome of that, therefore, is the need to strategically hone in on particular recommendations that are related to the mandates of the portfolio committee in order to make it optimize on its effectiveness and efficiency of recommendations to be implemented in the executive branch. And so we've identified three sort of general thematic areas, and that from the portfolio committee of basic education, and that is the inclusive growth, industrialization and employment, social inclusion, and access to education. One may already kind of want to ask the question, why inclusive growth and why industrialization and employment? It's that because in our analysis and also our years of research in terms of IGFR and going through the challenges and the persistent challenges of employment, unemployment, and also basic education and educational outcome, is effectively that there's a misalignment or there might be a gap where skills or education first at the foundational level to the sort of the skills level and sort of passing them into industries and as employment or labor force. Along this way, along this line, if you like, or channel of development, importantly, therefore, we are saying here that that one needs to look at, for example, basic education, which is at the foundational level of education and learning, within the view of that the ultimate outcome that we would seek to achieve is ultimately inclusive growth, is ultimately employment. And it is essentially that also needs to even extend one step further into thinking what is the pathway or the viable path desired in terms of industrializing our economy with labor participation, with the future, shall we say, of South Africa shall be channeled into. And then coming back in terms of backward deduction is then that achieving the need or understanding the need for that social inclusion and access to education. With that in mind, so we did a broad analysis in terms of the alignment and going through the specific recommendations of the thematic areas and identifying that along with the National Development Plan, the Youth Plan, Medium-Term Development Plan, and so forth, into seeing how the two are aligned and or needs to be aligned, and provide our comments and inputs and recommendations thereof. As you can see, for instance, the review of the funding formula for provinces and municipalities, it's asking essentially the resource question. But we want to stress here that this recommendation is only partially aligned, not to criticize or critique on either side the recommendations or the current mechanisms of IGFR that we have. It's just the fact that we would like to stress that they are this very important constitutional imperative mandates and principles embedded in the mechanisms of IGFR, specifically around the funding formulas, and that those principles are there, must have been there to stay for a reason. It's not that that now suddenly, that we have been doing something all these years for the wrong reasons. There is a reason. It's therefore, to simplify all of this, there was a reason why in 1997 and in the establishment of the Constitution and those principles therein, that the formulas, funding formulas, and the channels, and that we call the intergovernmental fiscal relations foundations were established. And so there needs to be that consideration of and understanding of that the mechanisms have been there for these reasons, and that now the recommendations, if it wants to be effective, it can't just ignore those very imperative constitutional principles that are embedded already. With that stressing, I'm going to move quickly to the next one. Is that, for instance, we do see also in our research for over the times, as I said, that monitoring evaluations is a key to ensure that we don't have duplications and essentially wasteful resource allocations and or activities that are embedded. So what we have seen in terms of education is that we have, as a government, for over decades, even from this very start, under with Madiba's first presidency and the henceforth after that, a significant amount. In fact, it has been the majority, the number one chunk portion of a resource being injected into education, health, and social developments. Specifically on education, over the past 20 years, then there has been significantly always overpacing inflation allocations going into the sector. And so what then we find out is that there are duplications, there are wastages. For instance, back in 2014 to 2016, there was a sort of proliferation of this corruption scandals and also schools that were built for basically empty schools for children, and that was not utilized or never delivered in terms of some of the facilities and infrastructure, education, basic education infrastructure that would funded, that never saw any kind of outputs and effective results, obviously, from that. And so we are encouraging that apart from the monitoring of the performances, that it be monitored more strongly and aligned to the finance management of it. And particularly because as soon as it becomes a financial figure, it becomes easier to monitor and in line with then the outcome of that investment, if one can put it like that. Also, we'd like to stress that some of the sort of more recent, I think, developments that one cannot ignore. For instance, I'm going to jump to this particular slide, as it is absolutely crucial. This issue of youth unemployment, all right, what of it that has changed, I think, cannot be ignored. As from Commission's research, is that right about 20 years ago, right, as a common sort of conception or hypothesis was that, right, if there's unemployment problems, it's got to be about education, lack of education or lack of skills. It's now perhaps no longer the case because, as one can see, that the rates of unemployment for even secondary and tertiary, let's first start there, has significantly increased. For example, even tertiary. So we have put in all this investment into educating and upskilling and all the way even to beyond basic education. Unemployment does not get resolved. The supply side problem that's and or input or as injections, right? Because when we train and skill, we are essentially upgrading the quality of that labor supply. However, our industries and the economy, right, itself just simply doesn't absorb these new entrants into the labor force, no matter how skilled they are. That's effectively what this particular graph, especially on the tertiary side, is saying. And then let's move our sights towards the left, is that all across, which is perhaps not surprising, but certainly something for us to reconsider, is that across all whether you're primary completed or secondary not completed, or even if you're completed, all of them, right? The probability of unemployment has significantly increased. I almost want to say deteriorated, but sometimes it might be thinking the other way, thinking that it improved. No, it's across all sectors, whether you are educated, not educated, and then with due consideration for all the investments, increased investments into education, our outcome result of educational outcome just simply does not translate into actual employment outcomes, which is the key driver, a factor for inclusivity. That I think is from our research, would like to submit to the commission, to the committee, and this under this P20 Youth Parliament's recommendations to consider. It's not just no longer about just dedicating everything into education ultimately. So what then? What if that is not the problem, or that hasn't solved the problem on the labor supply side of things, education side of things, then what is the problem? So that's when we turn into the other side of the supply demand or markets analysis. And we looked into, therefore, the industries. What is wrong about our economy that is preventing us from creating more jobs in order to absorb the labor supply, well, no matter where one is on that levels of highest level of educational attainment. And here was where we identify, we believe that that there is, as we can see in terms of the excessive bureaucracy that is in the processes of starting businesses and sort of a kickstart and a business or employer to create jobs. And as well as, for example, there's a very stringent compliance and also labor regulations to the extent, sure, we need it, but to the extent where it starts creating quotas. That is when it becomes a very negative signals and disincentive for industries to create jobs. And we need industries to create jobs because they are the only people that actually is in the market that is able to create jobs apart from the public sector, except that public sector, just to emphasize that it's ultimately just another market participant in the market or in the economy, in that sometimes the problem with the public sector, private sector dichotomy of thinking job creation is that one has to be aware that if public sector creates all the jobs, essentially it's only replacing and crowding out the other sector. There is that potential, especially when the market itself, right, becomes disincentivized to the extent that it does not want to create those jobs. And then the public sector trying to fill that role. And I'd say that role, unfortunately, normally because of the different manner in which the objectives of the business models for between public sector and private sector, it wouldn't be as efficient in general terms unless the outcome is about something that is social and of social and redistributive nature. Then public sector may do better. But otherwise, if it's about growing and pushing and being competitive in the marketplace, then generally private sector is more suitable. And we also encourage this youth-led enterprise growth. Again, you'll see that the focus, as we're encouraging, start thinking about on the industry side, on the job creation side. And that requires, as I said in the beginning, that it needs to be linked along that whole chain, not just about the basic education on its own in its silo, but also think about the skilling up and also that transitional phase into a transitional channel into employment, into productivity and of the economy. Lastly, just some of the facts. is that we also see rather sadly the issue of youth needs that is not in employment, not in education and or training. Effectively, we are talking about the complete sort of non-activity of the labor supply of the or cohort of population, and it's a significant worry, not just from the fact that they are inactive economically, but also in or not participating in any way, but it's also of that the generational effect of this, right? And other social generational effects of it. For example, we all know that if someone is unemployed for a long time, the probability is actually dropping as that years of economic inactivity is taking place. Your unemployment probability as the individual who is already unemployed, it's only going to go higher and higher the longer and further away one is from joining the labor participation force. There is a thing that we call it's a learning to be working. Not just about the actual skills and so forth, but just learning to be active, learning to work the work in that sense. That the by osmosis that one learns to be to always be working and or becoming a productive member. And we also see that the distribution of the highest level of education attained by youth and age group, of course, most of it is still very much on the left-hand side. However, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that, you see, even those that are 25 to 34 of age, they are not educated. That's the issue, or they are under the sort of the grade 12 matric education, and the proportion is quite high, quite a significant portion of it. And some more facts around the fact about the issue of enrollment. This is important because one, this is ultimately showing the attrition rate, dropout rate, if you like, in the sort of basic education range of education, right? Grade 1 to 12. And so what one should see is that these rates should stay constant and hopefully on a positive region. But what we see then in the data, unfortunately, from published by DBE, thanks to the department for the data information, is that the dropout rate is quite significantly high, with that -6%. Just to give a sense of what that means, is that we all know people are kids, even kids, are only getting older as the year goes by. So theoretically, they should be going from one grade to the next, to the next, to the next. And then together with the population growth and or general sort of the pyramid of the population, it should always be in the positive, not in the negative, right? If one is facing with, say, aging population or maybe dwindling population, like in Japan and some of the other Asian countries, or something like a one-child policy, then one might see negative. But the fact here is showing negative despite having positive growth rates of population. It means that kids are dropping out from one grade to the next by a significant amount, because -6%, and by the population, let's say about a quarter of the South African population, then we are talking about hundreds of thousands. Going then to the access, in our annual submission in the past, we have gone through various sort of social factors, support, background to education, basic education, like learner transports and nutrition and school materials. And I won't go too much into it, except to note that between provinces, there are high differentials in terms of that transport access and also of the digital connectivity in public schools. And so here, the story one might want to quickly jump into is that inequality of or rurality between provinces. But I'd say, and I'm happy to come back given the 15 minutes limit, is that it's not always the case, right? Some provinces, it's not necessarily the case that if your digital connectivity is low, you must be rural. That's also not what is being seen here. What rather one should see and appreciate in this particular information is that the way of connecting, because in South Africa and also in some of the developing nations, as we have seen, is that it's no longer about fixed line or broadband, or it has to be some kind of a, sometimes because of the technology that we have now, a tower is enough, sometimes even a satellite, for instance. Then you can connect, even if you don't have say, for example, broadband, which is specifically the physical line that is there. And with those, I want to jump to just to quickly summarize the two recommendations on the recommendations to the P20 Youth Parliament submission, is that we do first we do see and we encourage the need for more and detailed data and information. We are a research institution, a constitutional institution under the Constitution 220. And in order for us to, and all across, and if we, especially when we want to strengthen our monitoring and evaluation effectiveness, we need data, we need information. And number two is that we, as I said, because we have gone through the analysis of the labor supply and then understanding with the past information over the past 30 and 20 years, is that no longer is the case that we just, as long as we put more money into education, we will solve this unemployment problem. That's not going to happen. We now are at the point where we need to start thinking, and this is our recommendation, to start thinking on the industry side, on the job creation side, how to grow the economy, if one can put it more simply. So these are the past recommendations of the FFC. I'm not going to go specifically into that, but except to just prove that we have made a series of recommendations on learner transports, as I said, and the funding models and thereof. I happily refer honorable chair members to our website with this annual submission for the divisional revenue tabled year on year. The last one that we tabled was just in this beginning of June. And we're also not just talking about some of these other factors of labor supply, but also we really also dig deep into in terms of the even ECD, for example, as a specific focus, or the educational outcome, reading for meaning, and so forth. So with those, I hope I achieved this presentation in under 15 minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good morning, honorable member, DGE, and the entire team from Department of Education, and officially and all stakeholders present. As the Deputy Chairperson, it is my honor to welcome the one who will make the Department Department Basic Education presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The presentation from FFC presentation. Thank you.
Chairperson, I think it's the National Planning Commission now and DBE after. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am, you are correct. I want to welcome the one who will make the Department of Basic Education presentation, and then we take the question after.
Thank you, thank you, Acting Chairperson. It's Llewellyn. We will now take Chairperson, if you'll allow, the presentation from the National Planning Commission, which will then be followed by the last presentation, which is that of the Department of Basic Education. Thank you, Chair.
Department. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Secretary.
Oh. Thank you so much, Acting Chair. I am going to be making the presentation on behalf of the National Planning Commission. I have already indicated that we're joined by several other commissioners and the Secretariat. But if I can start by just giving apologies from the Deputy Chair of the National Planning Commission, Commissioner Maluleke, who is unable to join us. So I hope those apologies will be accepted. The second thing that I want to say is that with the commissioners that are here with me, we have 3 commissioners, Pearl Pillay, Tsepo Fiela, and Phumzile Chifunise, who all do much more work on youth than I do. And I'm looking forward to, in the questions and discussions, having an opportunity to get their additional inputs. The third thing that I want to say is that this is such an important meeting, because the question of youth, what we find, I think, in Parliament and what we find in the National Development Plan, is that because it is an intersecting area with so many separate government departments and portfolio committees, is that it sometimes becomes marginal. And by giving the Basic Education Portfolio Committee an opportunity to look at some of the broader issues related to youth, I think will strengthen the possibilities for successful interventions in youth going forward. The next thing that I want to say is that if we look at the question of basic education has a key role to play because it is constitutionally bound to provide education for that period of compulsory education for all children, which, as you know, goes from grade R to grade 9. ECD, wonderful work being done, not compulsory. After grade 9, then not compulsory. But the work of the Finance and Fiscal Commission, which I think it's the 2025 report, was absolutely clear that the constitutional imperative of providing education to children within the period of compulsory education has to be prioritized. And that is important given the fiscal constraints in which we are operating. So one of the intersections that's important is the interaction between the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Higher Education and Training. And you'll see that in the presentation, because after grade 9, the National Qualification Framework allows for multiple pathways, and I'll talk about that. So let me go through the presentation. And Chairperson, I understand that everyone has a copy, so I'm definitely going to finish in 15 minutes. But that will mean that I don't go through all of the detail, but I'm assuming that members have the presentation in front of them and that you'll be able to go back and forth and pick up the detail that may not be covered. So what we're going to do is the NPC in this recommendation is a short diagnostic, and Mr. Singh has already covered some of that, but I want to pick up some of the issues. Then we're going to look at what was recommended in the P20. Then we're going to look at how does that align with what the National Development Plan said and what our development strategies are, opportunities and challenges, some recommendations, and then particular areas that I think we think require parliamentary oversight. So this quick diagnostic you'll see very much is in line with what Mr. Tseng from the FFC has already presented. What we have is high levels of unemployment, many young people aged between 15 to 34, and that age group is what we inherit in terms of ILO guidance, but it's in terms of how you gather stats. But it sometimes is a bit confusing because, of course, 15 to 16-year-olds are still in compulsory education. But we know the figures, and Mr. Tseng has already gone over this with us. Another issue that intersects here is the question of gender, because as per youth, we find that the issue of women, young women and adult women, are generally forgotten in the day-to-day work and thinking across chapters of the NDP or work in portfolio committees. And the NPC has taken a position to say we need to upfront women and youth consistently. But what we know is that young women who are even more affected by unemployment and being not in education, not in employment, and not in training. So I just want to make a few comments about this slide and a few more linking to what Mr. Tseng said. You see, one of the things we know about education and training and employment is firstly that provision of the skills alone doesn't result in employment. And I think Mr. Tseng made that point very powerfully. It's to do with having a labor-absorbing economy, and we need an optimum alignment of appropriate skills development to support that. But if it becomes a promise unfulfilled in young people who are themselves in families where there's high unemployment, it is a really frustrating, disheartening experience for young people. The other thing I want to say, a little bit informally, it's not in the presentation, is that I would love there to be discussion with the FFC about the role of the informal economy in terms of employment. Haroon Borat has written an excellent paper which argues that if we saw and supported the informal economy, and participation in that, like many other developing countries at the same level of us, we would see a greater sense of employment, even if it's not formal. Mr. Tseng has made the point that a lot of the employment is actually into the public sector, and we need to get that balance right. Recognize the informal economy, support that. We do make that point later in this presentation, and I also know that this is something that Commissioner Chifanyise does a lot of work in. So we want to make 6 recommendations. Obviously, inclusive economic growth. Economic growth that is not inclusive is not good for society. The question of industrialization and localization, if you'll see there, youth-owned SMMEs, that I think needs to have a broader developmental sense of what it means to be a youth-owned SMME and the informal economy. In terms of employment creation, I know when we say things like flexible labor practices, that needs to be carefully explained, and we do that in a later slide. So there's the whole question of incentivizing employment creation for young people. Post-school education and training, I'm not sure if you've got any members, Chairperson, who sit on this committee and on post-school education and training, but there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to ensure that we have a better alignment with the training that's offered, the work-based opportunities and this catch-all phrase of apprenticeships. So the question of youth participation, again, some of the commissioners, and particularly Commissioner Pillay, has been very active in working with youth and policy processes. The monitoring and accountability is a huge piece, which we won't have time to go in a great amount of detail, but it's something that I will touch on. So if we look at what the NDP goals are, decent work, inclusive growth, quality education and skills development was an apex priority in the NDP. Health, social protection, so fundamental. And then an integrated, inclusive economy, including in the rural areas as a priority. Then we have a range of national development strategies. Now, I'm not going to go through those because of time, but what we do need to note is that these multiple strategies, we need to question the extent to which they're being effectively aligned. If you look at the major national development initiatives, there's a great deal of work happening from the presidency. There's work happening within partnerships between government and the private sector. So we have the SA Youth Mobi, we've got Harambee, we've got the YES program. Then we do have departmental-led initiatives such as Expanded Public Works, Community Works program, and we have work that's being led by higher education. So one of the concerns that I could talk to for a long time but won't is the whole question of how we effectively align and coordinate such multiple programs. So the challenges, as I've already alluded to, there's fragmentation, there's re-coordination, there's huge funding constraints, and as the FFC has indicated in their work, both today and previously, is the balance within the envelope that is education and training. We need to have some hard conversations on that. Implementation capacity is a major issue of great concern in the National Planning Commission, and we are doing work on that, the skills and job mismatch. And in our economy and in this new gig economy, though that skills requirements changes so rapidly. So I'm interested in looking at what the FFFC has said about the digital divide and their latest figures in terms of even access to broadband or any connectivity at school level. So the challenge is with all of that is that we can have events and symbolic participation, but how deep does our work reach across this massive need that we saw in the slide on numbers, which was also presented from FFC. So we've got a real policy momentum from the presidency, and that needs to be harnessed to really truly coordinate and lead. We've got existing policy instruments. We've got opportunities such as the digital transition and the possibility of the green transition. And we have young people who we have to give a sense of hope and possibilities so that their mobilization and innovation can grow. So we have a set of recommendations, and nobody's got cameras on, but that is Phumzile, Commissioner Chifon-Yise, and she has previously been in Parliament, and these are photos from that. We need institutional and governance reforms, and that development compact has to coordinate. And the challenges of coordination we need to honestly confront. We have to look at economic and labor market interventions. FFC said a lot about that. And what we need to look at quite carefully here is the state-private sector partnerships. If the private sector is a major employer. We have to make sure that we are capitalizing on, building on the possibilities that exist in private sector employment and in the informal economy, non-formal. The question of flexible labor regulations, of course, many of these issues are going to be the domain of other portfolio committees. But for example, the need for flexibility in terms of gig-based work is something that you might to explore. And Commissioner Fiela is on the Minister of Communications advisory team on AI, and I'm sure that if you're interested, he would be able to follow that up. Youth employment zones with incentives for firms offering youth and youth for firms hiring youth. And one of the things I just want to quickly say, because there may not be time later, is that the question of what are those employment zones? Are they dominated by metropolitan areas? What are the youth employment opportunities in, for example, rural areas? And how do we make sure that we're looking at employment possibilities holistically across the country so that youth feel that they can have a future in areas that are not in the metropolitan areas? So there's possibilities like, do we set aside a quota system for public contracts for youth? Post-school education and training, I'm looking at time and I'm feeling anxious, so I'm going to go very quickly. There's a lot of work happening in DHET, and one of the new principles the minister is exploring is saying that you can, to make it oversimple and not take into account all of the challenges of implementation and timing, ideally the minister is saying that he would like to see only students who have work-based opportunities that they are involved in doing, being enrolled in TVET, so that you would have to be in a workplace and in study so that we get this kind of connection, rather than, as been pointed out by FFC, young people going through studies and no sense of being placed or having a sense of moving into employment. So there needs to be much more careful work around skills. There needs to be much more listening to those people in the private sector and in the government sector and in areas that are important for rural development, to understand what skills are needed and how we train. And every time I look at this, I want to keep reminding us, and for women, young women. So there's often in our imagination a dominance of the male figure. So there's ideas about what we would like to see in township and rural economy revitalization. The question of monitoring, evaluation, and accountability is so crucial, because our data is spread, it's fragmented, and we need to be able to track specific indicators across government and the private sector so that we have a public dashboard so we can track delivery. So here we have an image of Commissioner Fiela, who I've mentioned already, and he was also came to Parliament before to present. So the NPC is saying we have to look at entrepreneurship, and I've already spoken to that. And the NDP has specific goals around SMEs. We've got to strengthen the commercialization of youth-owned innovation. We've got to increase youth ownership and participation across the value chain. And we've got to reduce structural barriers for youth entrepreneurship, because those structural barriers are insurmountable. And again, that's where the work of several of the commissioners that are present is relevant. So in terms of proposed areas, it's legislative and policy, it's budgetary and program oversight, It's institutional and coordination oversight and data monitoring and oversight. And all of those we would be able to talk to more. So what we are recommending is that the recommendations that are there, they do provide a coherent evidence-based framework. And we now need to make sure that as we move towards the next National Development Plan, and with the existing NDP that we have, with the medium-term development plan and the integrated youth development strategy, that we lead to greater impact because we are coordinating the key delivery elements and correctly monitoring and evaluation with robust parliamentary oversight. So the NPC's ready to support in operationalizing, or at least in monitoring and providing advice, which is our mandate. And the last thing that I want to say is that the alignment between DHET and DBE is critical. Given the financial constraints within which we're operating, the DBE's fundamental responsibility is to provide high quality education, minimize repetition and failure, which is disheartening. And then we've got to make sure that the NQF pathways after grade 9 align in a way with what the DHET is doing, so we don't have duplication and challenges in terms of our minimal resources. So thank you very much, Chairperson.
Chairperson, Honorable Mngadi, yeah, the NPC is done. I think we should now move to DBE. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the well presentation, NPC. Let's welcome the one who will make the DBE presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I will just, before I call on the department, I'll just quickly just make some remarks regarding the presentation that we are doing today. Thank you to the representatives. I think it's been really, really enlightening hearing from the representatives of the National Planning Commission and the Financial and Fiscal Commission. Thank you very, very much. The work that you do does definitely feed into all that we do, and it helps, gives us some kind of sense of how we are doing, not only just in our portfolios, but also how does it feed into the greater scheme of things? How does it feed into how we do the work in pursuant of giving young people in particular a chance at a decent life? Today's program has asked us to consider matters that go to the heart of our education system. And so these are the recommendations that are arising from the P20 Youth Parliament and the P20 Women's Parliament, which are therefore important. They give expression to the experiences and the concerns of young South Africans. As was mentioned before, we are also requiring government to demonstrate how those concerns are going to be translated into implementation. And so for the DBE, the NCOP House resolutions before the committee focus particularly on learner pregnancy, on gender-based violence and femicide, bullying, and school safety. These challenges, members, can't just be addressed by the education sector alone. They require functioning partnerships between schools, families, communities, and government departments. These are including health, social development, justice, and SAPS. And so the department will today take the committee through a range of interventions currently being implemented, including measures relating to learner pregnancy prevention and management, comprehensive sexuality education, the care and support for teaching and learning framework, and school-based support system. This is also particularly important because the resolutions themselves, Chair, require ongoing reporting on our interventions and on their efficacy and impact. The broader P20 Youth Parliament recommendations also require us to confront the transition from education into opportunity, the very point that Professor Metcalf was making a little bit earlier. The NPC's presentation reminds us of the scale of the challenge. The unofficial unemployment rate among young South Africans aged 15 to 34 stands at 47%, while the proportion of young people are not in employment, education, or training remains deeply concerning. So it means that the work of the DBE can't be insulated from the bigger, broader problem that we ought to be responding to. The FFC also highlights that despite high school attendance among children of school-going age, the completion of secondary education remains a challenge. And so, Chair, our responsibility is to ensure that learners acquire the foundational knowledge, the skills and competencies to allow them to progress through the education system. So to allow them to progress through our education system, but ultimately to find productive and fulfilling lives. And so I'm going to hand over now, Chairperson, to Dr. Whittle, who's going to lead the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good morning to the acting chair, all the members of the committee and the other entities. As the Minister has indicated, our presentation will focus on the social protection and social inclusion recommendations of the P20 Youth Parliament. And I'm going to invite Mr. Liko Bottoman, who is the Director for Social Inclusion, to take us through the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, Acting DG. I am just going to share the slides that we have prepared for this presentation. Just trying to double check, Dr. Whittle, if my slides are indeed showing.
Yes, just on slideshow.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members. The P20 report that the Minister has responded to for the Youth Parliament and the Women's Parliament combines particular areas of focus, Honorable Chair. They focus on bullying, then there is a focus on gender-based violence, and then there is a focus on learner pregnancy. And all of those are tied together by the work that we do in comprehensive sexuality education. I do want to indicate, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, that when we get to the recommendations, you will see that these are recommendations that are already work in progress, and some of them we've pinned down quite nicely as a sector. But our suspicion is that the P20 process was pointing to maybe sufficiency of these interventions, because we also, as the basic education sector, we are concerned about scale and depth and also just the time that is given to these social protection interventions, as Dr. was mentioning. But this is just a presentation outline, and I will rush through it within the 15 minutes that has been made available to the department. Just indicate that, yes, when the P20 set, the National Council of Provinces then adopted the report, which was then handed to the Minister in January. And then we were expected to respond at least by the end of March 2026, which we did. For us, it is very important that we speak to these matters, which Minister has already termed as the matters that speak to the heart of education, because not only are they helping us to reach our national development plan targets, but they also sit at the heart of the medium-term development plan that has been handed down to us as the basic education sector, as well as some of the G20 development priorities that emerged from our G20 year of hosting in South Africa. The issues around learner pregnancy, GBV, and bullying, we do recognize that they do undermine the constitutional rights to dignity, safety, and quality education. And we know that over the last couple of years, we have been engaging with Parliament on the call for the GBV awareness and prevention to be integrated into the curriculum. And I think on a number of occasions where we have interacted with Parliament, we have outlined and shown how this has already been done in the current curriculum that we have, using our care and support for teaching and learning operational framework as well. There were 7 recommendations that arose from the report, which we have responded to, as they are stated here, and we'll get to them in the slides that follow. I'm just avoiding having to read them here, but we'll get to them as we do the slides. On the first one, the report was asking us to clarify the approach of the department in as far as teenage pregnancy is concerned. And our approach, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, is starting off with our policy alignment. We do have a policy for the management and reporting, the policy for the prevention and management, of learner pregnancy in schools. But we needed to ensure that that policy aligns with other policies that interact with it, like your HIV policy, your protocol for the management and reporting of sexual abuse and harassment in schools, the National School Safety Framework, and now also the new legislative developments under the Sexual Offences Amendment Act and the Bella Act, and all of those combined. And so our work has always been around that. You will then find that when we are dealing with learner pregnancy these days in basic education, we don't deal with learner pregnancy in isolation without talking about sexual abuse and sexual violation and sexual violence that is perpetrated against children. Because our understanding is that early unintended pregnancies are likely cases of sexual abuse and statutory rape. And so that's the policy alignment work that we're talking about there. We prioritize access to services, working with our partner organizations like the Department of Health, the Department of Social Development, and civil society organizations and other development agencies that work with us in this space for a multi-sectoral collaboration. To such an extent that if we want to provide sexual and reproductive health services to learners in schools, but the report is pointing out to the shortage of nurses that we have, which is a national challenge, not a basic education challenge. So the agreement that we have with the Department of Health, therefore, is that instead of school health nurses coming into schools, or rather failing to come into schools because of other priorities and commitments in health facilities, the health facilities that are linked to our schools would then take referrals from our schools. That's the modus operandi at the moment in terms of adolescent-friendly health services. They take referrals from our schools, and when young people get to those health facilities now in South Africa, you'll find that they don't wait, they don't queue, and they will be seen as soon as they arrive by that school health nurse who is not able to get to the school. The second thing that happens where facilities allow, you will find that there are what we call adolescent-friendly zones or safe zones for young people, where young people will then be seen without mixing with the members of the public. This is if the facility does provide infrastructural arrangements for such. You'd see that with young people and in these health facilities. So in our ongoing collaboration, we've always had the Department of Health, the Department of Social and the Department of Social Development. But now we've also added the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities because they're leading the country in the development of a teenage pregnancy strategy. Because our policy speaks about learner pregnancy, which means that we are dealing with pregnancy of learners who are in school. And because of that, we've got kind of a blind spot when you're talking about what is happening in communities where these children are coming from, even in spite of the effort that we have made to ensure that we connect schools to community centers. And so the strategy that is led by the Department of Women is going to help us close that gap that talks to communities, that talks to a general public. And where we have been strongest at, and this is the point that we've always made when we interact with the portfolio committee, is in the provision of this sexual and reproductive health information in schools, which has shown to build knowledge and prevent abuse and keep learners in schools as far as it can with the information that is provided in the classroom. Early unintended pregnancy dialogues that are led by the different leaders in the sector, minister, deputy minister, MECs, and other leaders in the sector, have proven also to bring some of these challenges of learner pregnancy to the foreground. And, in keeping with what has been stated by the Youth Parliament in the P20 process, we've also ensured that there are youth-led initiatives that are led by young people on the ground, so that it's not just interventions that are led by the department, but that young people themselves are getting involved in the co-curricular programming for much more impactful interventions for adolescents. I've been given the note that my microphone is breaking. Is that the case?
I think it's fine. You could just continue.
You can continue.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. Please do indicate when I break, because I think there's a network challenge at TPE. And also another addition that we've made to our EUP work is on facilitating parent-child communication by ensuring that there are learner and parent dialogues that take place in our school communities. Not a piece of work that happens without difficulty, because I think the generational gap between parents and learners is, problematic in this area. But we're also finding in other places, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, that actually the age cohort of parents in South Africa is getting younger and younger, which therefore means that we should be expecting younger parents to have a little bit of an understanding about what young people are going through today. But we've got a different set of challenges there, because then we've got young parents who need support themselves. When they come to school, they then realize that these are former learners of the school. In fact, when teachers engage with these parents, you find in many cases that these are parents that used to be learners themselves in that school, who actually have dropped out and all of those things. But there's another element that we're finding in the research that we engage with, where parents who are called into the school, they never really pitch. And where they pitch intoxicated. And so those are the challenges that are surrounding this new edition of learner-parent dialogues, but we are nonetheless going ahead with them. Capacitation on learner pregnancy prevention and management. On this recommendation, we're very happy that actually this recommendation came up, because it allowed us to do some deep excavation work in understanding what is happening in each of the provinces in as far as capacitation on learner pregnancy is concerned, so that we're able to tell, quantifiable stories, qualitative stories about what is happening. And we're happy to mention, honorable members, that there is work that is happening in all the provinces, as you can see it here. In the interest of time, I am not going to go through each one of them because this information is available and it's fresh. It was just collected in the last quarter when we were preparing to submit this report. It is fresh information, but it talks about all the different facets of the work that is happening on the ground in provinces, in districts, in school communities to ensure that we deal with this issue of learner pregnancy. I'm also happy to mention, honorable members, that we see now that more and more provinces are also not just focusing on biomedical and social drivers of HIV and learner pregnancy and GBV, but they are also focusing on dealing with the stigma, because you would recall that in our last interaction, we did indicate that even though we've got the policies and the guidelines and everything, but we still see young girls being stigmatized. And the policies are supposed to protect them so that they don't fall off and drop out and struggle to come back to school. And so that information went back to provinces, and we see now provinces beginning to also then address the issues of stigma that prevents children from accessing the constitutional, legislative, and policy right that has been provisioned for them in this case. But this is just the information. The work around SGBs as well has been another highlight that you could mention here. Of course, and working with other departments in support of the basic education sector. I think the portfolio committee is also aware of the different levers of change, because even though the report is talking about GBV in the curriculum only, we are then indicating to say that not only did we do the work in the curriculum, but we did the work even in the core curricula and curriculum support areas. To such an extent that, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, if we were ever to be asked about our curriculum by the world, whether we have in fact incorporated GBV-related topics in our curriculum, the answer should be yes, because we've got a world-renowned curriculum when it comes to this. When other parts of the world are focusing on sex education, we are focusing on comprehensive sexuality education, which allows us to deal with the social drivers and structural drivers of gender-based violence, to such an extent that 33% of our comprehensive sexuality education lessons in life orientation right now in South Africa focus on GBV-related topics. And these topics are graded by age and grade cohort. And on top of that, we've got the teacher development programs that we do so that teachers feel sufficiently empowered to address gender-related matters in the curriculum, because the curriculum is nicely set and it does provide the pathways and the roadmap of providing this information in the curriculum. But we also needed to ensure that the teachers are well trained to do this. Not only for high schools, but if we're also asked about the work that we do to ensure that we deal or we address or prevent gender-based violence from an early age, from a young age, in terms of early childhood interventions. We do some work with ECD practitioners and grade R teachers as well to deal with those issues there. Our learning and teaching support materials work, besides the evaluation that we did of textbooks and LTSM for prejudice, which leads to gender inequality, therefore gender-based violence, because that's what that was among some of the things that we're evaluating in our textbooks. In 2025, freshest on the table, we launched our state-owned life orientation textbooks, which are strengthening the scripted lesson plans that we had already developed for comprehensive sexuality education. So now the life orientation curriculum actually has a free textbook that is owned by the state that can be used in classroom delivery in this curriculum. Of course, then the co-curricular programs that are led by the implementation of the integrated school health program, together with some of the other programs like the National Schools Moot Court program that talks to constitutional rights, Youth Citizens Action Program that promotes active citizenry amongst young people. And if you ever are able to attend our Coral Eisteddford, you'll see that there are segments of that competition that talk to building rights consciousness and safe youth platforms for young people. We will never let young people go back home without rendering performances that talk to GBV, learner pregnancy, substance abuse, you name it, and all those different social ills that we are dealing with. And then the social mobilization and advocacy and communication work. We are also priding ourselves, honorable members, with this area because we have a television program that was produced and broadcast by government, by the Department of Basic Education with the SABC that talks to these issues. And it looks at comprehensive sexuality education broadly and the thematic areas within comprehensive sexuality education. We've also partnered with our partners in ASITEJ and the International Association of Women Judges, the South African chapter of that association, for the development of an industrial theater that has been going around in primary schools, working with young people and providing them information about GBV and sexual abuse using animal characters and puppets and so forth, so that this information is understood by very small children. Because, honorable members, we come from a stage where we would give this information only to older children. But I think honorable members are aware that even younger children as young as ECD age, are actually getting sexually violated. And so that information then responds to that gap that we've always had. And we've also done some work with 22 community radio stations to also provide information on GBV, bullying, and sexual violation on our radio series called Life on Madlala Street. So this is an area that supports that curriculum thematic area or recommendation. And then they also speak about the GBV prevalence data that flows from the HSRC study, which identifies hotspots in our communities. And they're asking us whether we're ever going to take into account the information that comes out of this study in our planning for implementation or program implementation. And yes, the answer is yes, we are intending to. In fact, we have already started to, because we have been engaging with our South African Police Service, our civil society organizations to look at what works in preventing gender-based violence and other forms of violence. And, how can we then work together to ensure that there is streamlining and dovetailing of resources, particularly in those areas. And as a result, what you see is that the work that we do in delivering care support for teaching and learning and the Global Fund work that looks at adolescents and youth programs is actually targeting what is understood in that study as high-burdened districts and high-burdened sub-districts. So that is already being used. That work is already running. It is in those high-burdened districts that have been identified in that prevalence study. But more than that, what we want to do also is to add the legends that speak to SRGBV and learner pregnancy. Well, there are legends that speak to learner pregnancy already in our SSMs, but we want to align now the SRGBV legends against these so that, as I was saying, in terms of our policy alignment, learner pregnancy is not a standalone thematic area. It sits with violence, statutory rape, information, and all of those things. So we want that information to also come out in the reports that are being provided by schools. And also work has already started with social development to look at the social protection information system as well, and how it can also assist us to strengthen the reporting against these issues in the institutionalized and mainstreamed reporting mechanisms. And as Minister has already indicated, work, you would recall from our engagement last week, we indicated to the joint portfolio committees that we have already initiated our interactions, particularly with the hard-to-reach departmental government departments. Social development and health are easy, and SAPs, they're also easy because we've got existing work that binds us together with them, like the Integrated School Health Program, the National School Safety Framework, and the partnership protocol that we have with SAPs. And that's why it's easy to reach them, because we've got a document on the table. And so we're hoping that once we begin our interactions, with which we have already initiated with the Department of Justice, we'll also have some kind of a binding document that will then enable us to have continuous engagements, even with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Support systems for GBV victims. This work is only possible when we are able to strengthen how our school-based support teams respond to the needs of children. And this is work that we've already started in our inclusive education agenda to ensure that the school-based support team remains ready to deal with not just issues of special or learners with special education needs, but also issues of social exclusion and issues of psychosocial support and violence experienced by children. And also we've added the issues around discrimination of children. So school-based support teams are being, at the moment, capacitated so that they are able to respond to these issues. We recognize that they have been in a space where there is, challenged knowledge around what needs to be done when there are cases of GBV that are reported in the school. And so that capacitation is happening. Of course, again, we're working with our different departments, as Minister was already indicating. And if we use the care and support for teaching and learning framework of implementation, it then allows us to also look at family relationships that exist, which may lead to the problem of school-related gender-based violence in our schools. And we heavily report on what schools are able to report to us. And the freshest work that we've been doing in this area is work that we've been doing also with the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, who, by the way, I forgot to mention as a part of the government departments that have been brought on board. They have given us resources that allow us in each province to take over 200 learners on a 3-day program. It's a camp for young leaders. And I think this responds rather to the youth parliament concerns in particular about how, as a department, we are capacitating young leaders in our schools so that they are not just token leaders, but they're given the information and the capacity and the skills that they need to lead properly and use the agency of the offices that they hold to address this issue. So this is what has been happening in our provinces. Representative councils of learners in a camp that looks at skills development and empowerment on these issues. And of course, they go through team building, motivational sessions, accountability, and how to also facilitate reporting. Because remember, last week we were saying that we are shifting away from young people only reporting to teachers and principals when they experience gender-based violence. We're saying that they can report to anybody, which simply therefore means that representative councils of learners may just be another point of reporting. So representative councils of learners therefore need to be capacitated and equipped so that they know how to deal with these reported cases in their offices. And then mitigating bullying in schools. There is work that we have been doing as a department on this as well. bullying prevention manual that we have developed and we've been training our provinces and districts on, including the online safety work that we're doing with the Films and Publications Board, the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies, and UNICEF. And there we're targeting particularly cyberbullying, grooming, sexual grooming, in particular sexting, as well as safety against human trafficking. And this work supports the school ICT policies as well, because the ICT policy needs to be mindful of the fact, and we said this last week, that we need to be mindful of the exploitation of learners that exist on online platforms, which needs to be created, as well as the learner code of conduct intervention that we're doing there to ensure that that speaks to sanctions. The learner code of conduct right now, we always find like a gap where if gender-based violence or abuse is perpetrated on an online platform, on social media, outside of school, but between learners that go to the same school or that go to our schools but in different schools. We wanted the code of conduct to also speak to that, so that there's accountability and that there's consequence management for learners who are perpetrating gender-based violence and bullying against other learners, even on social media platforms. And of course, we've also strengthened our guidelines for disciplinary measures in schools to ensure that the learners that are, yes, we do have, what we're using is a restorative approach to consequence management for bullies. But we are not saying that we are, taking them away from facing the consequences and the accountability of bullying, especially when they are perpetrating bullying in schools. Embedding GBV prevention in the curriculum, I think we've already indicated when we're talking about the curriculum in the second, the third recommendation, that this is what you've done. And I did promise that we're also going to talk about the age appropriateness of how we are grading this thing across the grades and across the ages. So we've got progressive age appropriate learning on violence, where progressive learners are taken through, gender stereotypes first, and then identifying all forms of GBV, and later then they can be able to recognize and know how to live abusive relationships, because there's intimate partner violence that also happens between teenagers in our schools. So the content is looking at not just intimate partner violence, but just building healthy relationships where learners are taught positive ways of expressing intimacy, communication boundaries, so that they understand what's a good touch and a bad touch as well when they're younger, and how to end unhealthy relationships in a way that allows us to reduce GBV and bullying risks in that sense. We also touch on issues of consent. And I want to pause here, honorable members, and say that the issue of consent has always been girl learner focused, in the sense that we've been talking to girls about how to say no or how to exercise your right, that kind of a thing. But I think when we look at the stats and some of the cases that we've been engaging with, where young people are actually charged with a sexual violation, we realize that boys actually need to be engaged on the issue of consent, so that it's not just a girl learner focused intervention, but also boys understand what this is, because sometimes they are charged with sexual violation, not because there was sexual violation necessarily, but there are those issues of statutory rape, age gap difference that happens when they enter into these relationships, and they end up becoming or engaging in sexual activity among themselves. And then the older child would then be facing the problem of sexual violation, and then they have a criminal record then in that case, purely because of misunderstanding of how consent works and what the age of consent is and what the age dynamics of consent look like. And so these are just some of the areas that we have started to do since Minister did the inaugural commemoration of International Day of the Boy Child and the work that happens from the stemming from these commemorations. So our engagement with boys, yes, is looking at gender inequality issues, violence prevention issues, and we are now also talking to them about consent and how to exercise and receive consent. So that's why I needed to pause there, so that honorable members understand that this work has already started in the work that we do with boys. Of course, then it would look at building empathy, negotiation skills, making decisions, and and the areas that I've already mentioned around unequal power and control. Then the last one is looking at DBE compliance and reporting commitments. Minister has already indicated that what we've been asked in that report is that we need to provide reports on this work, particularly that slide that talks to the work that happens in each of the provinces. We are committing to provide this report to the portfolio committee, and we will be in anticipation of being invited by the portfolio committee, honorable chair and honorable members, for us to be able to come back to the portfolio committee to report on the work and how we are faring and how we are making impact on the ground. I must say that the constrained fiscal environment we find ourselves in is putting us in a position where we are heavily reliant on additional support, additional external support, so that we can respond to the question and the question of depth in the interventions that we are bringing. So, but we will be providing those reports back to the portfolio committee as we go along. So that is really the briefing, honorable and honorable members, and we are recommending that the portfolio committee then notes the briefing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the well presentation. Let me put it. Minister, I'd like to take this opportunity to give you the platform for the final words before I open the questions. Minister.
Thank you very much, Acting Chairperson. No, I think the team has covered it, and we look forward to hearing any questions from the members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can open up the question from the members. Honorable members, we have 3 presentations. I will ask you to ask about the 3 presentations. It will be easy when they answer, and they will go to the end. They will go the way that we start. Thank you. Honorable members.
My hand is up, Chairperson. I'm not sure if you can see all the hands.
Yes, I saw. Honorable Speto. Honorable Chatan. Honorable Low, number 3. Honorable Spice. Honorable Makakula. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands. You can start, Honorable Speto. Your platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just go through the questions that I've listed here. Greetings to you, Chair. Greetings to the Minister. The DG is present, the National Planning Commission, the Financial and Fiscal Commission, and all other honorables in the House. Chairperson, I'll just start with the recommendations themselves, just to reflect a little bit. And they speak to the core business of the Department of Basic Education, because that's where we start building the society. And Minister, if you check from point 1 to point 3, inclusive growth, industrialization and localization and employment, they all speak to how do we as education department align our curriculum and subjects therein with the development trajectory of the country, the economic growth trajectory of the country, so that you are able to see how our curriculum responds to the current aspirations economically, to the future aspirations in a short term, mid-term, and long term. It speaks to industrialization and localization as well. It's the same thing. How to prepare our learners from basic education level to be able to be part, to play meaningful part, participate meaningfully in the industrialization at a localized level. It also speaks to creation of employment. How does our education actually lead to self-employment and employment by the what we call employers or industrialists when we industrialize locally? So the gap here, Minister, for me, I have not heard about any research that is being conducted to explain our short-term, mid-term, long-term economic trajectory as a country, so that our school curriculum is able to align with it. So if perhaps you had included that in your presentation, or perhaps spoke to the already existing evidence, which now drives your attention when you develop curriculum, revise curriculum, to indicate that this is how we are aligning with the short-term, mid-term, long-term economic growth trajectory of the country. In that way, we'll be certain that our curriculum is proper, relevant and coherent and part of the development agenda of the country. There's no proper presentation of that, just to see how your programming speaks to those, So we, on that one, clearly you see that we're missing the point. If you go to point number 4, post-school education and training, it also speaks to us, Minister, how are we continuing those collaborations with DHET, Department of Higher Training and Education, DHET, yeah, you can just say it for me, Department of Higher Education and Training. Yes, how are we aligning with them, and what work are we doing with them already, and what results are we seeing already? There's no talk around that. Perhaps even speaks to their participation in this meeting, why they're not here, so that we can start now engaging on practical activities conducted and the results that we see from it. So that's another gap. If you go to point 5 and 6, youth participation, I would have loved to hear from the National Planning Commission what are practical things that you are guiding us as to say, this is how we can meaningfully improve participation by the youth, the indicators, how to drive us to that direction. So it's quite empty, because we know the concept of participation is a highly contested terrain within the studies of development. And I'm sure the National Planning Commission knows that very well. So how, in our sense now, truly practicalize participation, not nominal participation or manipulative participation. As I say, it's a highly contested terrain, the notion of participation within the context of development. So NPC, how to really guide us practically to have something substantive in our plans and know what's the framework and how we go about doing things. Monitoring and accountability is one weakest area of the Department of Education, for example. There are no clear baselines, there are no clear performance indicators, primary and customary indicators or custom indicators. There's nothing like that. So the NPC would have, for me, come strongly with strong criticism and direction as to how to have those proper indicators which speaks to meaningful participation of youth as we move forward. So I think it's a gap. I don't think we've done justice to all the recommendations that were made to us by the Youth Parliament. The issue of violence, Minister, is a serious matter, Minister. As I speak, Minister, in the Fiscal High School in Changa, a learner died because of violence in school. And it was a long, what we call a battle between the learners. And you ask yourself, where were the teachers to intervene early? Because they had an opportunity to intervene. But because there was no intervention, girls were involved speaking to GBV, boys were involved speaking to GBV, and one learner died in the process. It was the same case, Minister, in Vusumuzi High School in Mandeni. A learner died in school because of the stabbing that was happening inside school. So how do we then make sure that we make sure there's peace in our schooling environment now. No weapons, no drugs coming in. Because the girls as well. Fine, you may say it's boys who died, but the girls as well. They are affected by this. They are endangered by this violence and weapons in school. So we are still failing in terms of that. If boys can kill each other, what about girls? As defenseless as they may be, what about them? Because wherever there's violence, women suffer more than males. We know that. Evidence has taught us that. So if we still allow violence in schools, we are really making these adolescent girls and young women more vulnerable to violence, which could be rape, which sometimes goes unreported and all that. So we are worried about lack of practical steps to deal with this matter. It was the same issue, Minister, in Westmead Secondary School. There's riot leading to banning of the whole school. So it speaks, Westmead is in Durban, Westmead Secondary. It still speaks to the same thing, violence in schools. The same thing, Minister, Kwangoza High School relating to dilapidated school infrastructure. Learners have been engaged on school unrest because the infrastructure is dilapidated. Nobody's responding to it. The school inspectors go there, but they bring no solutions. To the point that now learners riot. And as I said, whenever there's distraction in society, women suffer more because in a space of distraction or in a period of distraction, the rapists see an opportunity. They do their scrupulous tendencies of imposing themselves to young girls and young women. So why I'm saying this, a person who thinks at a shorter pace will think I'm just bringing other issues not related to issues of GBV. But we know that whenever there's disorder in society, women suffer more. Go to Africa and see. There could be a protest about water, but somebody's raped in the process. So these issues are interconnected and interrelated, Minister. If we don't have a fully functional multi-sectoral approach, we'll not be able to solve some of the problems when you look at GBV. Charles Chairperson, to go through the few points that which speaks to what we have reviewed in terms of the reports that were given to us, looking at how we've implemented the recommendations, how the department may have implemented recommendations by the Youth Parliament. First thing that we notice, Chair, there's reasonable constitutional and policy alignment if you look at what the department has presented to us and structuring of responses against recommendations. So on paper, I think there's something to really say the department is going somewhere. But there's lack of proper targeting as relying on SHRC 2022 statistics, which is not school youth focused and district and sub-district level, designed. So the HSARC statistics may provide some information, but we need to have a proper one which looks at what happens inside school. Because if you look at youth in a broader sense, we are not focusing in the youth at school and the circumstances therefore. So we may need to see how to balance the HSRC statistics so that we are more comprehensive and more targeted. So if we are not targeting very well, we are likely to spend resources and miss the point. So let us go and see if HSRC 22 statistics is really relevant for this kind of a job, because we are looking at school environment. We need data sources which speak to school environment and disaggregate to much younger age groups from age 9 to age perhaps 19 or to 24. Something that's more like focused. There's no proper baselines to guide the proportional allocation of resources to where they are needed. If you look at what the department has presented, we propose equitability approach where you say, yes, there is GBV across, but it is mostly affecting this area and these schools. I heard the presenter saying the HSRC data is able to speak to that, but I'll engage you to go look deeply if it does provide such level information, because our researchers have said something contrary to the point that you made. There's no costed implementation plan entailing activity scope with timeframes, minimum standards monitored, and primary and customary indicators that we need to look at. So in your plan, you have none of such nature. So for me, it means there's no plan. And we know about the 5 Ps, poor planning precedes poor performance. So definitely you're going to fail because you don't have a plan which speaks to the scope of activity, and the scope of activity influences the size of a budget that is required. There are no timeframes, there are no minimum standards that you are monitoring as you implement that scope of implementation, because you need to rely on evidence-based interventions, not the thumb-sucked interventions. You need evidence-based with clearly defined minimum standards. And there are no primary and custom indicators which explain more finer standards and processes and outputs that you want to see. So the department must really look into this. There's no clear funding modality to respond to implementation, rendering it to non-implementation. The department is not clear where you're going to get money. And unfortunately, some of us know why you're not clear around the finances. It's because the president and the minister of finance have cut the budget. So that's why you have no money, but you continue to make plans that you're not going to implement. So at some point, the JNU must accept that it has failed the people by not allocating the resources required. And the departments, all of them, especially the social services department, they can't plan properly because there are no resources. So we know there in the departments, we do have capable people, but who are crippled by the fact that there are no resources. They plan what they know is not going to be implemented because there are no resources. It's a failure of the JNU, and the JNU has to reflect and correct this before other political parties take over government posts. It seems are really failing. No reporting on specific activities already conducted, showing implementation fidelity and scientifically measured outputs, understanding that reach is not always equal to impact. So you can see yourself, Minister, there's something that you need to focus on: implementation fidelity. We need scientifically measurable outputs that we'll be able to speak on next time when we meet, not just to speak rhetoric, speak frameworks and all that. So we have to have a plan with specific scope of activities, and such scope of activities should then be able to tell us how much is needed. No clear modus operandi on tracking the implementation on the ground, also focusing on the implementation fidelity. So if you don't track implementation on the ground, how do you say you're going to make impact? How do you see if you're not making impact? How do you learn from your own implementation and correct? It's impossible. So it's one of the disasters that the youth must know, which really the parliament is failing to ensure there's oversight on it, and the department is failing to implement. Last point, Chairperson, no response to human resource capacitation, allocation, and performance tracking. So we have this good plan, but we know we have gaps, human resource gaps. There are no nurses, there are no social workers on the ground, there is no proper multi-sectoral stakeholder platforms. You can't even now report to us what you have done with other departments, DPE, because you have done nothing. You have engaged them, as you say, which means you met somewhere, there was lunch after engagement, you engaged, you met again, you engaged, but no outputs. So without properly trained human resources, how are you going to implement the recommendations by the youth? You are definitely going to fail. So we know by now that we are poorly planning. Therefore, the presidents will be failure to implement. So it is really, really worrying. I want to rest here, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Honorable Totan.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. I'm going to try my very best to be cognizant of the time, seeing as we have a House sitting at 2 o'clock, which Honourable Lowe had so graciously highlighted for us in the chat box. Honourable Chair, I welcome both the presentations and the focus on moving beyond policy commitments towards evidence-based decision-making, measurable outcomes, and meaningful accountability. Acting Chair, our focus should be on outcomes that ensure quality education, equal opportunity, accountability for public resources, and an education system that prepares every learner to participate meaningfully in the economy, and that delivers opportunity, excellence, and accountability, regardless of the circumstances in which learners find themselves in. And without the input of information, research, data, innovation, and evidence for why we do what we do, this can never effectively be possible. With that said, Acting Chair, I've noted that the FFC notes that the policy focus on addressing youth unemployment and driving inclusive growth has primarily been on increasing educational attainment and skills development. However, the employment outcomes show that while the proportion of unemployed youth with less than matric has decreased, unemployment has increased among those with secondary education. And I welcome this focus once again on evidence-based decision-making. From the DBE's perspective, what does the department believe needs to change in our education system to ensure that increased educational attainment actually translate into improved employment outcomes for young people? Secondly, Chair, there's also a finding that continued access to education, despite population growth, is increasing. But there's another concern that Despite this, learner dropout rates remain critical. And as a committee, we've repeatedly emphasized that access alone is not enough, and we need to monitor learner throughput and successful completion from the year that a learner starts school to the end of their compulsory schooling career and beyond. So the DBE had also made these utterances, and particularly I appreciate the minister's focus on that, especially when announcing the annual NSC results. But I'd like to know what progress has been made in improving learner retention and throughput, and particularly in monitoring this. As we've repeatedly seen today, consistently storing and gathering data is incredibly important. So then further to that, Acting Chair, from the Basic Education Department's perspective, what can the department do to ensure that the education system is equipping young people to access a broader range of economic opportunities rather than simply focusing on educational attainment? And this is in light of the FFC's finding with regards to quotas and economic opportunity. As we should all continue to advocate for the creation of economic opportunities for all while acknowledging redress. Acting Chair, then in terms of scholar transport, only 4.8% of learners nationally benefit from free scholar transport. This can, of course, be due to various reasons, but the substantial variation between provinces is what concerns me. We've seen that scholar transport is also inconsistently rolled out across provinces, while the funding model continues to raise questions. What are the department plans to address these inconsistencies and to improve on the delivery of scholar transport? And what changes can we expect to see as a result of that, and by when? Of course, we've seen in several provinces, it's not actually the Department of Education holding the scholar transport competency, but it might be and the Department of Transport in that particular province. And so these inconsistencies actually, I think, are the resulting into inconsistencies in terms of delivery. Then from the NPC recommends a stronger focus on work-based training. How does the NPC propose that we measure whether interventions are actually improving the transition from school to further education, training and employment, rather than simply increasing participation in programs? And so we've seen in several documents, in the department, our measurement is often based on quantifiable numbers of how many people are attending something, how many workshops have been held, and not necessarily always focused on outcomes. So what is the recommendation of the NPC for us to move away from that to more accurate measurement of success of our programs? Then when it comes to entrepreneurship in basic education, the NPC also recommends greater support for youth entrepreneurship and SMMEs, including cultivating entrepreneurship as a viable career pathway. How could the DBE spearhead this from the level of basic education? For example, could greater emphasis be placed on entrepreneurship through the curriculum, entrepreneurship days, learner symposiums, or other initiatives that expose learners to entrepreneurship at a younger age that might actually lead towards, I think what was mentioned by a presenter earlier, Acting Chair, was learning to work and to stay in work. Then when it comes to learner-teacher support material and reading for meaning, the FFC recommends that funding should be prioritized and emphasizes that LTSM is critical in improving reading for meaning, which of course none of us can argue against, while also identifying the need for more uniform implementation of programs that enhance reading for meaning. What lessons can the department and have the department possibly drawn from successful local initiatives, and how's this looking at scaling interventions that are already demonstrating success. And this can, of course, be from the private or the public sector. For example, there's an opportunity for a whole of government approach when it comes to literacy, and in creating a sort of a shared responsibility for literacy. The Department of Sports, Arts and Agriculture, together with COGTA, could play a role or a greater role in supporting local libraries. DBE could lead programs at school and community levels. Some examples that I'm thinking of that I've been exposed to are, for example, the City of Cape Town has a program called Pram Jams, where infants and very small children are exposed to literacy and to cultural activities through libraries. And there's, of course, also the 1,000 Books Before School initiative in libraries in the City of Cape Town. That has a significant impact on creating a love for reading amongst very young children that would hopefully translate into being able to read for meaning at a later stage. Has the department considered collaborating with successful local government initiatives of this nature? And if not, why not? And if so, which are these? And then when it comes to teacher skills and professional development, could the data held by SACE and Umalusi be used to inform a more comprehensive skills audit? I've seen that one of the recommendations is a skills audit of educators. But don't we already house this data with SACE and Umalusi? And if not, why not? And could this not be used to identify areas where there are skills gaps? Then lastly, Acting Chair, I'd also like to reiterate just briefly the concern for school safety that Honorable Mkhize had previously spoken to. Can the department tell us how many schools have been identified as being in hotspots for GBVF, and what additional resources have been allocated to these schools, and what improvement have resulted from these interventions? This is particularly important because simply identifying the hotspots are not enough. We need to know whether the data is actually changing the situation where it is sitting. And then the department says it will overhaul the training of all 75 education districts on the national school safety frameworks. I'd really like to welcome this intervention because since the signature and announcement of the national school safety frameworks, oversight had actually indicated that schools out there are not necessarily taking full advantage of this framework and making use of what is available to them. There still isn't a mind shift when it comes to prioritizing school safety at a ground level. What is the timeline for completing this training? And once the districts have been trained, how is the implementation of the framework going to be monitored and enforced? Of course, as Honorable Mkhize had also given us numerous examples, we know that it's particularly urgent given ongoing incidents of violence in schools, and including an incident reported just this morning involving an alleged sexual assault of a grade 8 learner, as well as reports of teachers claiming that they were nearly sexually assaulted by learners in classroom just in the last week. What concrete measures are being put in place to ensure that the NSSF translates into safer schools on the ground? Lastly, with regards to safety, Acting Chair, given the seriousness of the incidents of GBVF that we find in schools, and with regards to sexual violence and sexual abuse in schools, the indication last week, and I know this was only 3 working days ago, was that the minister would meet with the Minister of Justice regarding the sexual offence register. And I would actually propose, and I'm not sure whether this proposal would be effective in this meeting or perhaps during a programming meeting, but that we convene a meeting specifically on teacher vetting and the various protection mechanisms, including SACE, the National Protection Register, and the Sexual Offences Register. And this is particularly in light of the DBE also now acknowledging that there hadn't been enough thought put into male learners Significantly, I've also recently realized that the protection of male students when it comes to the sexual offense register is not nearly efficient. And of course, there is a lot of work to be done when it comes to the argument of whether this should be made public or not. Can the department provide any update with regards to engagements on this and indicate what outstanding gaps remain in ensuring that individuals who pose a risk to learners are prevented from accessing schools, whether they are educators, staff, whether they work in ECD centers, or whatever their capacity they have access to children in. Thank you, Acting Chair.
Honorable Law.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will just show my face. I will not be able to proceed as I'm going to be interjected by the network. Let me welcome you, Acting Chair, and thank you very much from the department. And we could have received the presentation. And let me greet the Minister. Let me greet the DG, the Deputy Minister. I think quite significant, Chair, I've got Part A and Part B as we got the presentation. And I'm going to start with the DBE part, where the briefing demonstrates the real breadth and policy coherence across all the 7 resolutions that could have been brought forward. It also brings together the learner pregnancy policy, and it also gives us comprehensive sexuality education and support, Chair, which deals with a lot of frameworks, your school-based school support teams, the National School Safety Framework, and the curriculum materials and independent interdepartmental partnerships that could have seen that has been into a single and a constitutional grounded platform. So engaging on Section 9, 10, 12 of the Constitution, including Section 21, subsection 1 of the Constitution, Chair, it is quite genuine and strength. And I would want to acknowledge that before I tend to my concerns, it is quite a comprehensive presentation that we got that is being compelled in the sections of the Constitution as I've highlighted. But Chair, the bread is not the same as accountability. One must start saying that it's not the same as accountability as what we have before us is a catalog of activity. When I say the catalog of activity and partnerships and provincial reach figures, as I view what we've got here, and what we don't have is a single national baseline which has a budget attached, because statistics goes along with millions. When you speak of stats and you speak we have done something, you must attach millions or you must attach money. So if any of the resolutions, the time-bound targets, the verified outcome data, or any other consolidated implementation matrix. So on that basis, Chair, I'm not able to treat this brief as an evidence that responding to all of the issues that could have done. I'm saying this because I could have put into perspective issues that would have went to as per recommendation and engagements. And I would want to deal with issues that cut across that I want to put into record. First and foremost, when you look onto the reach is not the same as the impact. I want to term it like that firstly. When you look onto the provincial table, it contains figures over 107,000 learners who are reached through the Eastern Cape campaign and over 50,000 who are reached in the Northwest Peer Education and more than 53,900 dialogue and debate participants in Limpopo. But also, Chair, we cannot regard a radio broadcast, a once-off campaign, a scripted lesson, a peer education camp, and a psychosocial referral are not the same as intervention. They cannot be added together to demonstrate coverage, Chair. We must start there. Without unique or duplicated beneficiaries, dominate and denominators and date and standard definitions, Chair, it is quite important that these numbers may overstate what has actually reached learners and cannot show whether the behavior has changed or educational continuity has improved. That's number one that we must look onto. When we also look onto the provincial data that cannot be compared, you realize that provinces are reporting on different scales in beneficiary groups, and they are also utilizing different programs, Chair, and types and different reporting periods. When you look onto Gauteng reports only partially on policy adoption in 9 of the 15 districts. And when you go to Northern Cape is still awaiting training, and other provinces report entirely different mixes of learners, parents, and educators, most of the SGB members and social workers. So we need to know what are the national minimum services standard is, and which provinces and districts fell below, and simply the activities that are taking place in a sequence of a progress. And when you go to the 3% of the CE lessons addressed in the gender-based violence, the figures is not usable. I'm saying this because the states presented without a lesson dominator and a great distribution of delivery fidelity. and the data or any other assessment evidence. As it stands, it tells the committee nothing, but whether learners are actually receiving effective lessons or gender-based violence or femicides, any other in extending such. So we need to look on to these particular issues. And when I look on to the citation of the 2022 HHSRC GBV study for hotspot targeting needs, that needs to be tested. The study prevalence simply covers people aged 18 and older. It is not learner survey 1. Used on its own without any triangulation against school level, Chair. Where the child-focused evidence, it cannot be validly identify which schools or communities require priority support and risk stigmatizing communities on the basis of adult non-learner data. We should look onto those particular issues to address what we have said we should align and deal with, so that we don't make it just to be part of compliance and we move. I think there's also, on the cost, the brief is quite, I think the presentation or the entirety, it is quite silent on the cost. There's no allocation by resolution, by province, by program, no indication of whether activities are funded from voted funds, conditional grants, or donor programs. Hence, I said, states without money attached becomes a problem, and no sustainability plan for partner or global fund supported interventions. The committee must be able to assess the affordability and the prioritization of value for money. Without this, we are not able to know how we're going to be able to achieve. And the multi-sectoral language across the department and the provincial department schools and the entirety of other departments, your social justice and sports, can obscure accountability unless a lead institution deliverably, we've got deadline and reports are assigned to each of the actions that we're going to put. So that we're able to know who's doing what, who's not aligned to what, because the reality is that when you go down there to locals, they seems not to understand these agreements and MOUs that you seems to speak about. When you go to locals or under-reserved areas, there seems to be more of challenges that children are still facing these particular situations. And those that get to know this information are those that are advanced in quintile 4s and quintile 5s. So how do we therefore deal? Because we've done a lot of oversight. They've shown to us the realistical point that has been put in paper. It is not proven down there on the ground. So the other thing that I want to speak about is the school-based support team. Its functionality, it is asserted, it is not measured. It is described as the principal school level coordination mechanism, but we are giving no caseloads, staffing norms, referral turnaround times, and case closure rates or learner satisfaction measures, which would deal with annual completion of a template. That is not evidence, that is a team's functioning that we should deal with. Share. We should deal with staffing constraints affecting schools. This is quite serious. When you speak of staffing constraints affecting schools, you speak of your nurses, your social workers, your learner support, your agents and district specialists who should be mapped against the caseload and geographical access and be able to deal with issues that are containing and dealing with our learners. So are we able to respond to such? We should be able to detail and be able to say we have responded in detail. It's to school, base to base, and we have responded because when we go to oversight, we don't have such. An organogram is just a paper getting dust, but does it respond to the gist of the issues that propel us to be finding ourselves here? So we must be realistic as we are going to pursue this particular engagements. And then when you speak of a data governance and the privacy, that safeguards that are not quite described. When you speak of modernizing the SA SAMS chair and linking into a national social protection information system, it could improve early identification, but pregnancy and violence data are highly sensitive. And I want the department to specify the law basis for collection and the minimum necessary fields, whereby the role-based access, the retention periods, and the de-identification for oversight reporting and build responses before, not after the system is being scaled. We need to know about those particular things. And we should also test whether the definition that captures the incidents occurring online on transport roads around school premises and through adults as well as other peers, and they well captured and are they well addressed in terms of that, so that we're able to know and understand. I would have listened to the presenter when the presenter was speaking of the curriculum content itself. Substantially, it is aligned with international technical guidance on the age-appropriate learning about stereotypes and violence and all of that has been mentioned. But the teacher preparation becomes a concern. Your timetable allocation, the comfort, what sensitivity topics, and the material availability, and the learner participation and the referral that on the pathway share, we should look onto that because they should be determined whether the content is actually delivered, and none of this is demonstrated on the presentation. Now, I'm saying all of this because how you test it and how we are going to receive an action. We should be able to know how we are going to respond to such. So I've put all into perspective, and I'll not move to questions because I'm quite content of time. It's 12 o'clock, and then I'll forward the questions to Mr. Brown, and I'll move to part B, Chair, on the FFC briefing. I think the Commission's central analytical point is, in my view, correct and important, whereby South Africa's youth unemployment crisis cannot be solved through supply-side interventions alone. No, we can't. And education, training, and wage incentives matter, Chair, which cannot be a substitute for demand-side conditions, where investment, industrial policy, and job creations are quite enormous and important. We need to diagnose, and we need to have a supported way to deal with the percentage that we're getting into the need rate for personnel aged from 24 to 15 years. We need to look on to the consistent stats of South Africa's own reporting on the 37.6% on the thorough 3.9 million gap that presentation that does not mention. And accept the Commission's broader framing that the basic education is one link in the integrated youth development pathways, not a sector that succeeds or fails on its own. We must put it into perspective. What that said, being Chair, it is quite before the committee treats the Commission's recommendation as an operational program. There are several evidentiary and analytical weaknesses that need to be corrected on record. And in my comments, I will cover the quality of the evidence base, the education-specific findings, and the fiscals, and the constitutional risk that in the equitable share proposal and questions of governance are in that right. So firstly, Chair, to substantiate my issues, I would want to put on record one. The sourcing behind the key figures is incomplete. Why is it incomplete? A number of charts in the presentation have no visible source or notes of definitions that carry the real weight, youth grant beneficiary, the internet connectivity, the broadband access, and earning opportunities that are not consistently defined through the document. And I cannot responsibly endorse the recommendation built on figures. I can only endorse, or that cannot be traced as a source, a date or population definition. I also take note that the presentation is dated 1 day after the evidence cutoff that is being used in supporting the analysis. So some figures may already been superseded by more recent official releases, but we need to be clarified on that one. And on the grant dependency, that is not supported by the evidence base in the presentation. The presentation associates the 5.8 million young grant beneficiaries with a grant dependence. One, the social grants primarily indicate poverty exposures and the reach of state protection, not behaviorable dependency, and the recipient does not establish unwillingness to work. So it's also unclear whether the youth is in the direct beneficiary or lives in the grant receiving household. The figures need to be disintegrated by grant type, age, it must have sex, province, and household status, so that we deal with the terminologies that have been reconsidered. It should be reframed as evidence of the economic vulnerability and the social protection reach, so that we are quite clear as to what are we measuring about. Are we having progress, or are we moving? Now, quite concerning, the presentation cites the 5.64 million registration and the 1.9 million earning opportunities through the National Pathway Management Network. More recent the presidency report on the February 2026 already cites over 5.77 million registration on the SA Youth and more than 2.36 million earning opportunities. The Commission needs to specify its reporting date and stop comparing the cumulative registrations and opportunities in the unique beneficiaries as they share the denominators. So we should, as Parliament, actually we need a complete duration, remuneration, transition, and unsubsidized work and 6-12 months retention that is going to clarify what could have been there. So I want to put into submission these particular issues, because when you look onto the 9.7 million learners in more than 21,000 schools, they rely on the school nutrition program and the impressive scale figure, but coverage alone says nothing about meal regularity, nutritional standards, and its delivery interruptions, and the food safety or procurement performances. Similarly, Chair, the scholar transport analysis compares the proportion of learners transported without establishing a common denominator or verified demands. So I want the national definition of the eligible demand and the published funded transported and the waiting list total, so they were quite be able to measurable. So we are going to apply the Maslow there. We're going to apply the SMART principles, where we need to measure as to how, when we put into effect a report of this nature, because this report of this nature speaks on to the key issues that we need to look onto. And I think, Chair, as I go down, because I'm quite content on the time, I think the youth age bands across education and labor market and the program data sets must be used to consistently deal with the cohorts to expand the differences of the explicit in terms of the issues. So I'll further put my recommendation and questions to Mr. Brown, and I thank you, Chair, for the opportunity.
Chairperson, are you there?
Yes, you can continue, Honorable Spice. Your platform is yours.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm sorry, the correct pronunciation is Spice, not Spice.
Spice. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
sorry, Honorable
No,
Spice.
thank you. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I will be concise and to the point. I would first of all like to thank each and everyone for the presentations. And I think, Chair, what has come through quite strongly for me across all three presentations is that we certainly do not have a shortage of policies and frameworks and programs and initiatives, and that there is clearly a considerable amount of work that has been done. The question, however, for me, Chair, is how we move beyond the measuring only of activity, like how many people we have trained, how many programs were conducted, how many learners were reached. For me, are these interventions really changing the lived realities of our young people? And are we able to identify where they are not working, and are we able to adjust it accordingly? I will start, Chair, with my first question will be directed to the FFC. The FFC recommends about a youth development compact under the presidency, as well as a youth economic advisory panel. And so mine would be, when I listened to the presenters, I would like to understand what specific institutional failure will these new structures solve that cannot be addressed through the existing structures, such as the NYDA, the DPME, and the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. And one needs to understand how will we prevent further duplication, bureaucracy, and administrative costs. When it comes to the outcomes, I would want to understand from the FFC what measurable outcomes would the Commission attach to these recommendations. In other words, within the next 3 to 5 years, what do you see? What do you see in terms of the reduction in youth unemployment rates, and what should we as Parliament reasonably expect if these interventions are implemented? The FFC also proposes a mandatory youth impact assessments for major policies and budgets. One would want to understand how will they go about in dealing with these assessments, what methodology would be used, and importantly, what consequence would follow, say, where a department repeatedly adopts policies or budgets that have demonstrated a negative impact on youth employment. Reference was made to private sector partnerships, and the FFC recommends that scaling state-private sector partnerships with youth employment targets. And I would like to understand what evidence demonstrates that these partnerships produce indeed sustained employment rather than temporary placements, internships, or short-term work opportunities. And then on the youth employment zones that was also mentioned, what proof is there that the FFC does the FFC have that expanding the youth employment zones or EZ incentives will actually create additional jobs rather than maybe simply subsidizing firms for young people they would have employed in any case? And then I think my last one to the FFC would be that where the FFC proposed that contracts be reserved for youth-owned businesses, how does the Commission propose that these contracts be reserved? Or how it not reserved, but how will it be structured so that we create genuine, sustainable enterprises rather than fronting, politically connected intermediaries or businesses that remain permanently dependent on state procurement. I would like to, with time in mind, move to my next question, and that would be on comments made by the NPC. And Ms. Metcalf in particular made reference to rural communities. And also, I would like to maybe just focus on that a bit, because I sense quite a lot of fragmentation, and coming from a rural area, having been an educator within rural areas, I would like to understand the following issues with regard to that. And my one is a very simple question, but a very important question. And it relates particularly to the young people in rural communities. I have seen that there's a range of programs already existing, government programs. Many civil society organizations are running programs, private initiatives, and institutions that are doing extremely valuable work when it comes to youth development, employment opportunities, support for early school leavers. Now, I need to understand, and to what extent um, is there a focus on bringing all these existing initiatives together rather than continually creating new programs and structures? Could a more coordinated or consolidated approach maybe be looked at, particularly at local and at rural levels, enabling us to possibly pool the resources together, close the gaps between education and employment, and ultimately achieve greater measurable transformation that young people can actually experience in their everyday lives. And maybe the proposed youth development compact could become that coordinating mechanism. Um, I do believe that we could look at that, because we need to ensure that young people in rural communities are reached rather than just becoming another a national level structure that is far removed from where young people actually live. Now, and to the DBE, I would just maybe say that um, if I can just get to Mr. Bottomans, the questions. My issue is one that is a bit broad brushed, and it refers to the issue that Mr. Bottoman raised about radio and television programs. And my issue is not, when I pose my question, that I'm saying we should abandon radio and television programs, because first of all, the media landscape has shifted substantially. Uh, and I need to know from Mr. Bottoman, you refer to television series and a radio drama being used to carry, if I'm correct, school-related GBV prevention messaging. My question is whether we know that, do we know that these platforms are actually reaching the intended audience? In this digital environment that is so rapidly changing, I know that many young people increasingly consume content through their own devices, through social media and other digital platforms rather than traditional TV or radio. And while at the end of the other end of the spectrum, we have also vulnerable learners who may have none of these things. They have limited access to any digital connectivity altogether. And so I need to understand if the department is indeed measured who is watching, who is listening to these programs, particularly by age, by location, by socioeconomic circumstances, and whether the GBF messaging is indeed reaching the young people at the most at risk. So we need to look at the reach versus impact distinction. I think that is very important. A program, for instance, Chair, can report that it was broadcasted on 22 community radio stations, as the slide does, but that tells the committee very little about how many young people heard it, who those young people were, and whether anything changed as a result. And then my last question to the department chair is with regards to bullying and cyberbullying. The department outlined a number of initiatives or interventions to address the bullying and cyberbullying, including the National School Safety Framework, the Bullying Prevention Manual, and Online Safety Integrated Program. I want to understand from the department what proof is there that in that these interventions are actually reducing incidents of bullying and cyberbullying in our school, and how this effectiveness, can indeed be shown to us in terms across all provinces. Sorry, I've timed myself, Chairperson. I'm almost done. And then maybe the training of officials and implementing programs, those implementing these programs tells us what the department is doing, but not whether the learners are actually safe. So can the DBE maybe provide a committee with the measurable outcomes, like including trends in reported bullying and cyberbullying incidents, the number of schools affected, interventions that were undertaken, and whether repeat incidents have declined? And then to conclude, where bullying or cyberbullying is then repeatedly reported at a particular school, what mechanism does what mechanism exists for the department to identify that that school is a high risk, and then to intervene beyond the normal disciplinary process, and to indeed hold that the relevant district and the relevant school leadership accountable if the problem persists, Chair. There are many more questions, but I am very considerate of time. So thank you for the opportunity, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Peace, and thank you very much, Honorable Low. Let's go to Honorable Makakula.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Acting Chair, I've got, I think, questions on the FFC and NPC. My first one will go to the NPC. You want to see me first? Okay. Yes, Ish. Okay. Thank you, Acting Chair. I think you can see that it's me. It's not, I'm not cheating. On the FFC, under the recommendation on social inclusion and access to education, this recommendation focuses on skills development and job placement through stronger oversight of SETAs and TVET colleges, modernizing the curriculum, improving job readiness, and investing in digital classrooms. If approximately, my question is, if approximately 63% of young people aged between 15 and 24 have not completed matric, how can government ensure that curriculum modernization and job readiness programs reach the young people who are already being excluded from the education to employment pipelines? Given that the presentation acknowledges the SETA and training funding has increased without significantly reducing youth unemployment, what structural changes will be made to SETAs and TVET colleges before additional resources are allocated? Please help me and millions of South Africans to understand the practicality of the proposed digital investment, as it currently sits at 24% to broadband connectivity. If it would be feasible in a department that is failing to transport learners to school. Worst of all, your presentation revealed that only 4.8% of learners nationally benefit from free scholar transport. On the NPC, on Youth Development Results Framework, on this recommendation on Youth Development Results Framework, which to me sounds like a redundancy of tasks. One, why is a new youth development results framework required when youth targets can be incorporated into existing government planning and performance framework? Two, Will the framework measure activities and expenditure, or will it measure actual outcomes such as jobs created, job retained, businesses surviving, and young people moving from NEET status into employment or education? Lastly, has there been an attempt to evaluate the existing effectiveness of motivation hubs before we could conclude that we need to roll them out into in townships? And where the rural areas deliberately omitted from the innovation hubs, or was it a mistake? Moreover, what is the plan to ensure connectivity in these hubs to ensure they are not just a white elephant? I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Makakula. And thank you very much, all members of Parliament. Please, let's go the way we start. The presentation are 3. So we can start with the presentation financially, and Fiscal Commission platform is yours.
I'm struggling with my Wi-Fi, so I will want to switch it off. So before the research team come in and comment on a lot of specific questions that also relate to research, I just want to make comments on some of the questions that have come through. So the first one relates to Honorable Mkhize's, which I dropped off while he was still talking, so I may not have gotten everything. But he did say, what are the practical ways to improve participation of youth that we would suggest? And I think this is linked to the question of Honorable Makakula, around this pop out of the youth that are unemployed, the bigger percentage of that. So I think what we're saying here is that a lot of effort have gone and still needs to go in increasing education attainment. I mean, judging by the top outs that are still there. So it means that there is still a need to bring about some improvement and to make sure that there is a throughput is still increasing. But I think what is also evident is that if a lot of children that are graduating are unemployed, I want to believe that part of the challenge that perhaps is disincentivizing youth to stay in school is maybe seeing that education may not be of much value, given that people are coming out and they're still unemployed and they're suffering. So I believe that could be one of the reasons that could, impact, that could create this top out from the education system. So I think that is why then we are saying that, focusing on improving their education attainment is good, but we do need to focus on increasing employment. And part of that for me is around how the students are being, trained, whether, even in their mindset, they're being trained and groomed towards achieving employment, getting employment versus being entrepreneurs. So we think that should be also part of the emphasis in terms of how the students are being trained, so that entrepreneurship becomes something that they also look forward to creating jobs. But that also will not work if the programs that are supporting the youth and general employment, SMMEs are not properly working, because I think, as even NPC has indicated, there are quite a lot of programs. There are issues of fragmentation that also may impact effectiveness and increased access of youth. So I think looking at how to ensure, while we are getting them to think entrepreneurship out of schools, but how then they're able to make it easy for them to enter into entrepreneurship, and to also support them with things like finance, markets, and all the infrastructure that is required. So I think we think that that actually becomes very, very, very important, therefore, to address the supply side of the need that we are trying to address. I think the issue of SETA, that we're saying that even though the funding increased, but it has not resulted in increased youth employment. So I think the point there is whether the focus of the SETAs also is on preparing this youth for getting employment, or actually focusing more on addressing the entrepreneur, or being geared more towards entrepreneurship and creating jobs. And maybe that's something that needs to be looked at, and perhaps that needs to be enhanced in terms of where the focus needs to be even of the SETAs in terms of their funds. So I think with those comments, may I allow the team also to come through and maybe address some of the specific questions that have been asked. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner, and again, thank you to the honourable chair members of the Portfolio Committee for the very spirited. I think one thing that's really, and I must commend I think we all can appreciate one another for, is the passion that we have for this critical issue and function. As economists always like to think, the function of that is the education to put forward, to produce, right, the skilled or educated, at least at the foundational level of labor supply, leading into the next stages and so forth. With that, actually, which I will come to in support of our acting chair and commissioner's point, because just maybe a little bit stepping forward is that, yes, entrepreneurship is meaningless and it will not work if the participants or the initiators don't have the skills, or the foundational skills at least. Can one imagine that if somebody wants to start any entrepreneur or business, who can't even count or add, subtract, or even calculate percentages, it's going to be a problem for many purposes, and I will demonstrate that more. But before that, I should really emphasize, in answering Honorable Spice, your point, kindly be aware that the recommendations, for example, this recommendation of Youth Economic Advisory Panel on the Presidency, that's not FFC's. That's actually from P20 Youth Parliament recommendations. What we are saying, as I said, is precisely that point. Your point is that it does not solve the structural issues of such, and the potential risk of becoming a duplicated and therefore wasteful and fruitless establishments if we don't see to these existing institutions and mechanisms that are already in play. Outcomes also, that's a P20 issue, mandatory reassessment or review of the funding. In fact, I emphasize that we're actually before we get to discouraging it, we just like to remind again that the funding mechanisms that are there in terms of the division of revenue, there is a fundamental constitutional principles behind it, driving it all this time since the establishment and the constitution, the advent of democracy in South Africa. These reasons cannot be shifted or set to be reviewed. because there are very good reasons, as I said, for these channels of how funds is allocated and so forth. In fact, it's even asking, it demands, the Constitution demands the economic use, efficient use, and allocation, appropriations, right, and monitored efficiently by Treasury and so forth in the Constitution on any funds that is being used across the nation. On the private sector, I'll come back to the evidence for private sector partnership, and because it is something that I think several honorable members have asked for, what is the practical example or the evidence for supporting this so-called private-public and school curriculum? And I appreciate Honorable Mkize and Jordan about the issue of curriculum. How does it link up to that? Last point, yes, that contracts, no, should not be reserved or specified in a deliberate manner by the public sector without. We're not saying that don't have a public procurement system. Of course, we all need that and supply chain management prescript, but one needs to be cautioned that in any interventions or specifications on the public procurement system, essentially buying and selling of intervening in the markets, I would say, for goods and services, it's an incredibly risky game if one does not understand what that industry or market and the business models of that particular goods and services that is being purchased or on which to request quote for. For example, buying pencils and pens and erasers is very different, right, to wanting to buy, say, state-of-the-art pipings and minerals and or computers and others. These are all very different industry, and it's got industry specific. Some part of it, it's supplied locally, some of it is not. And if it's not, then it's a particular way and costs associated. That's why it's a market, an industry market that to procure such. And for public sector or any say consumer, right, which public procurement is basically another participant in the market wanting this goods and services, it needs to understand that and appreciate that one size fits all procurements and specifications or quotas in such manners, it will only create significant markup costs in procuring these services. With all that, I shall say, if I may submit as hopefully a contribution to the committee and Parliament to consider. See, bringing in the example of, say, international experiences, China, after the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, essentially themselves inadvertently severed that the channel and the sequencing, earlier also Honorable Member mentioned, that sequencing of education from primary, secondary, tertiary, and so forth into skills and to the market. The number one question that the Communist Party at the time was considering was then how do we fill that gap? And the results, it may be, and it's not mentioned anywhere, even in the 5-year strategic plan for economic industrialization and all planning documents, it's not mentioned there. But what happened actually was, and it happened in the micro levels of individual households, individual schools, person to person, to essentially, and this is the submission for consideration only, right? An idea and hypothesis is that essentially they're allowed the youngsters, right, even at the school level, to start engaging in some of the skills learning that is more directly linked to a skill or a industry. For example, even just something simple as carpentry. woodworking. And because that leads to engineering. You need to know how to measure. You need to know how to work with a standard of measurements and or length and width and dimensions. Cooking even, right? These skills, cleaning even, plumbing, chemistry, dealing with that, and all involves mathematics, and also to the point of even sewing to manufacturing. And slowly but surely, it started from this sort of basic foundational and but nevertheless ambitious, I think, right? And I think bold, to allow school students to engage in these activities that is useful, and also able to allow them for a bit of earning as well in the market, right? Even soldering iron, for example, how to work with it and so forth, to now in 2026. I'm sure, honorable chair members, maybe we all have heard and seen some of these schools and students and households, they now opt actually for choosing programming schools over going to traditional schools, because they know that programming now essentially get to learn English, you get to learn mathematics, you get to learn to work with measurements and ultimately computers. With those, I hope that it opens up a bit of options and ideas to link up the industry to all the way to the basic education arenas for policy and implementation considerations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Where's my video now? Okay, thank you very much. FC, your feedback. While we are going to attend the plenary in an hour, I will email my question. But let's this thing here now. Okay, let me allow the National Planning Commission the platform. I have a network problem on my side. Can you hear me, members?
Yes, Chair.
We
Yes,
can,
Chair,
we can hear you, Chair.
We can hear you,
Okay.
Chairperson. Thank you.
Let me allow the National Planning Commission the platform.
Chairperson, unless it's only me, but we don't have any responses from the NPC. I'm not sure who is still on the platform from the NPC.
No, NPCs, I think it seems they've vanished. I wonder why.
I see Dr. Mostek is on the
Yes,
platform.
thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, this is Commissioner Mostert, and I'm a commissioner, and I am still on the call, Chair. Thank you. If I may use the floor, Chair, while I have it, the NPC would just like to underline the long-term consequences of the policy position that we're exploring. If we have learners age 10, almost 80% of whom in the last Pearl's international assessment unable to read for meaning and understanding, that means that population in 7 to 8 years are entering the workspace. It means in 12 to 13 years want to enter junior management, senior management in 15 to 16 years, and top management in 20 years. the NPC just underlines the long-term planning implications of our policy deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next one, Department of Basic Education.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. We will not be long, but I just thought, there were some overarching questions I thought, let me just perhaps handle before I hand over to the acting DG. Thank you to the members for your honest reflection, and I think your rigorous questions and interrogation of the work that we've presented today. There were just a number of things, and I think the members are absolutely correct in saying there must be a clear distinction between what are plans, what are activities, what are inputs towards aiding and fixing a problem, and the actual impact. And I think a lot of the members were raising the issues around, yes, you may be having these interventions, for instance, our protocol that we've signed with SAPS, which in my view has really yielded great results, because you can see some of the confiscations that we're doing with harmful materials in schools, some of the work that Mr. Bottoman was highlighting. So you can see where the department is making an input. But of course, I think what the members were really, trying to push for when it comes to violence and gender-based violence, particularly in our schools, is to ask the question, when will we see the shifting of the dial? And it may seem as though it's a repetition of what I think I said earlier this week or last week when we met with the joint committee honorable members. But the truth of the matter is we're not going to win the war on gender-based violence in our schools alone. That war is faced both in how parents are raising children, the communities children are living in, and the fact that you can't actually insulate schools from the communities from which they come. And so while we may make all of these strides towards making sure that at the very least school premises are safe, at the very least teachers are discharging their responsibility of ensuring that there's comprehensive sexual education, we can do that. But at the same time, I want to caution that there isn't a single wand that can be waved that's going to make South Africa any more safer for women than it currently is. It has to be something that is not only legislative changes, but it also has to be a cultural change. The truth of the matter is that South Africa is not safe, not only just for children, but it's not safe just generally for anybody living in the country. And that's something that I think as an entire government, and I think that's what I tried to communicate last week, that as an entire government, we must ask ourselves, what can we do as a department to further inform the government's entire response to the issue of safety? And of course, what we've come here to do today is to outline to you what it is that we as the DBE are doing, whether it comes from, positive reaffirmation, and as Mr. Bottoman was saying, the recognition of the International Day of the Boy Child, whether it comes from curriculum interventions, whether it comes from actual, enforcing of safety mechanism in schools, we are making those changes. But those changes will only ever be limited in the four corners of the school unless that message is taken and carried on by parents, that message is taken on and carried by community leaders, and I think indeed even by members of this House, because it has to be something that we can understand, that finger pointing about, sexual violence and gender-based violence in the country is not going to help us resolve the underlying problem which exists. And then I think the other issue was around reducing bullying and cyberbullying and our interventions here. And again, I think, the truth is, in a school setup, teachers can very much enforce, strict rules and regulations when it comes to the use of cell phones and the like. But what we are seeing is that, of course, cyberbullying and bullying in general doesn't only confine itself just to the classroom, and that it does happen even outside of the classrooms. And I think it would be difficult for us to expect educators to have a far-reaching impact into the home, into the community around this. But it doesn't mean that we abdicate our responsibility as a department to teach learners about the impact of bullying, teach learners about the impact of cyberbullying, and also the consequences that flow from that. Because, of course, there are legal consequences, even though we are talking about minors here. But it's quite important to not only lead with the carrot, but also be quite clear about what the stick is. Honorable Lori asked about the question around where does the funding of this is, are these voted in budgets and the like, and there isn't a simple answer except to say it's a basket of solutions, because on the one end, under Dr. Whittle's branch, there's obviously safety and care and the like, and so those funds are budgeted for in the work that we do in the provinces and supporting provinces. A lot of the other money does come from provincial allocation, but a lot of the work that we're doing is work that perhaps hadn't been envisioned when we were looking at how do we divvy up budgets in the basic education sector. So a lot of the work that we do is also supported through our partners. So we've got, for instance, the signed memorandum of understanding with the European Union, who have given us specifically 5 million euros to help us with the issue around gender-based violence in our schools. Of course, the work that SAPS is doing, that's work that they are doing from their budget, but supporting our schools. And then, of course, various other NGOs who are engaged in this space. I do think that going forward, Honourable Member, we're probably going to have to look, even though we've got a consistently shrinking fiscal envelope, we're probably going to have to look at other ways and means in which we are going to fund this work. But it's not just a single source that comes from the department, and so that's why we don't just bemoan not having the money, but we go and source partnerships that will help us in this regard. And then on the issue around educator and vetting, I agree with that the current situation does require urgent intervention. And I think we covered this when we met last week. And on our side, as I indicated to the members, we've abided by the Teddy Bear Foundation court ruling, because frankly, we believe that we should be held to such a standard. But I do think and support Honorable Jordan's suggestion that perhaps it might be useful to have both a justice, social development, and DBE in one meeting, in which we can all commit in Parliament, of course, under oath, to say these are the things that we are going to do to make sure that that target is met by next year. Because I don't think that it would be even acceptable for us to come before this House next year to say we are not yet done. But of course, as the members of the Portfolio Committee know, that work is not only just dependent on us. But I'm going to hand over to the acting DG chairperson, because I think that where there were figures that were asked, particularly around unemployment figures, I think the NPC and the FFC representatives have covered those adequately. And so, Dr. Whittle, I don't know if there's anything that I've left out of the response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. You've covered most of it. I thought I'll just pick up on some of the details if that's okay. Just Honourable Mkhize, I certainly take your point about drilling down into districts and into sub-districts. That's work that we're doing with the police at the moment. We've worked very closely with the police over the last 2 or 3 financial years for them to provide better data to us in terms of where crime in education institutions are reported. We now track, for example, the number of rapes that we have in institutions. Like one of the members indicated, we have rapes that are reported in ECD centers, for example. But we're tracking those so that we can see the trends. A lot of those schools, like the ministers indicated, are located in high crime areas. And so you do need a broader intervention beyond schools to address these kinds of issues. Honorable Mkhize and Honorable Low, have both raised the issue of the budgets that are available and the HR issues. And like Minister's indicated, we do have a conditional grant for some of this work. It is augmented by equitable share allocations in the provinces. And again, this is clearly not enough. Honorable Low is absolutely right. The issue of availability of psychosocial support professionals in schools is an issue that we have to address, and that's why we use institutional mechanisms such as the school-based support teams and the district-based support teams, and making sure that there's relevant, skills, social workers, educational psychologists working as part of those teams, and then working with the Department of Health to build better referral pathways for young people. Honorable Jordan has asked about how many schools. We've identified 283. Those 283 schools are located in 5 of our provinces, and these are provinces with the highest rates of crime and violence. And we're working very closely with the police in those schools. Just to also indicate, and I think Honorable Jordan has asked this before, we are working with the Civilian Secretariat of the Police now to assess, to evaluate our interventions 2 years later. Our evaluators will go into those schools over the next few months, and I'm hoping that by the end of the year we can give you some suggestion about whether our interventions are working or not. Honorable Low, yes, the issue about SASAMs, you will have to anonymize those, and we're working very closely with the teams, working on SASAMs to ensure that happens. And I certainly take the point. This is something that is of concern to us, that the quality of teacher preparation is absolutely critical to the kind of work that we do in this area. And so we're working with, and Mr. Bottoman has referred to this as part of the presentation, some of the work that we're doing in initial teacher education, but also some of the work through the NSSF training that we do, that we are focusing on CPTD, so those teachers who are in service at the moment. Mr. Bottoman, if you could just talk very briefly to the issue raised by Honorable Spies around radio and TV programs, and Minister, then we will hand back to you. Liko?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Whittle. I think Honorable Spies is quite correct by saying that the digital communication landscape has shifted, and that is correct. However, we still do have some young people who are still on television and radio for the same reason of digital divide that exists in our country. However, the data that we're working with is indicating that even in the most rural of areas in our country, there is access to digital communication, at least to a smartphone, that kind of a thing. And that's why we then had decided, once we had completed the productions for television and radio, that we then have supplementary digital material that we place on social media platforms and other related digital platforms for young people, so that it's not just limited to television, but what you see on television is what you would see on digital platforms of the DBE and many of our partners, like your United Nations agencies that work with us. The DBE television channel also has got a YouTube channel, and they've got social media platforms that they use, so that there is a much more broader supplementary offering for young people, so that if you miss it on TV, you still find it on these online digital platforms like that. We did receive statistical data from the SABC around the reach because we broadcast this on SABC channel and our digital channels as well. And there is some statistical information that you can always send at a later stage. And it really was looking good for what it's worth. It was really looking good. And we would have reported about it as well in our annual reports at DPE, but we can also make it available. But I think I take the point that Honorable Speaker is raising, that we need if we want to amplify and fortify the offering that we had obtained through this intervention, we probably would need to think a little bit more broader than just television and radio, building on the successes that we've seen since 2017 on these interventions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Acting Chair, we're done on our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Anyone? NPC?
No, I think we are clear from our side, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, let me take this opportunity to recognize the presentation we done. But on my side, the presentation sets out the Department of Basic Education response to 7 resolution and adopts by the National Council of Province after the 2025 P20 Youth Parliament and P20 Women's Parliament. The resolution address key challenges affecting learners, including teenagers pregnant, gender-based violence and femicide and bullying in school. The DPE's response describes measures to prevent and address this issue, including learner support programs, educators training, stronger monitoring of GBVF, enhance the school-based support system, and the integration of GBVF awareness and prevention into the curriculum. The department has also committed to regular reporting on the implementation and impact of this intervention. Under the FCC, the presentations looks as the financially and fiscally commission assessment of the P20 Youth Parliament recommendation. If it's focused on the youth unemployed, economic inclusion, education, skill development, and the government funding. It's also considered when the current policies and funding are helping young people in a meaningful way. The presentation also shows the closing link between basic education and the young people and the young people's economic opportunities. Although many learners are in school, many do not complete matric. This affects their changes of further study, skill development, and employment. The higher number of young people who are not in education, employment, or training shows the need for the education system to better prepare learners for the economy and the labor market. Honorable members and DG and the team from the Department of Basic Education officials, we are come to the end of our engagement today. Let me, on behalf of the committee, thank you all for your valuable contributions, for your time, and for the robust deliberation. We have noted the presentation, the responses, and the commitments made. We will follow up on the outstanding matters as a committee. To the Department of Basic Education, thank you once again for honoring this meeting. To honorable members, thank you for your diligence, and thank you for all officials and present. We are here. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you and safe travel to all.
Thank you, Chair. And bye.
Long live the chair.
Welcome, see.